Welcome to Late Night Story. When the world goes silent and shadows stretch longer, some stories awaken, whispered only to those still awake. So put on your headphones, turn down the lights, and let me guide you through the quiet hours. If you're listening alone, you're exactly where you need to be. If everyone can leave a comment to let me know where you are listening from in the world, don't forget to subscribe before you drift too far into the dark.
Story 1. I texted my ex after 2 years. Whoever texted back isn't him. I'm typing this from an airport bathroom stall because I don't know who is waiting for me outside my gate, and I don't think it's the person I thought it was. I'm not new to long-distance relationships, but this one still haunts me. At 18, I met Evan, not his real name, online. He was 20. I lived in the city. He lived deep in rural North Carolina, one of those towns with a single gas station, no Uber, and woods that didn't allow a phone call to go through for miles. We talked constantly. TikTok, Instagram DMs, FaceTime. After 8 months, I flew down and stayed with him and his family for almost a month. It was weird but sweet. Quiet house, polite family. Everyone praying before every meal. His grandma said things like, "A good woman tames a restless man," and "Evan dreams loudly." I thought it was Southern religious quirkiness. When I left, he broke up with me a week later, blocked me on everything. No explanation. He disappeared. 2 years passed. I'm 20 now. Out of nowhere, I got the urge to text him. Not because I wanted him back, more like unfinished business. Trauma nostalgia, or whatever. I still had his number saved, but I expected the text to send green or bounce back with an error. I literally typed, "Hey, ain't why I'm sending this. Hope you're good, Ev." I hit send. It sent blue. It was red within seconds. My stomach dropped. I almost threw my phone. Then he replied, "Is this really you? I've been waiting for you to text me back." And I'm like, text me back? He hadn't texted me once since he blocked me. Maybe he meant reach out again. Whatever, I didn't overthink. We started talking, and he was perfect, kind, warm, apologetic without being weird. He said he never dated anyone else after me. He missed me. He still had my side of the bed. He said his mom and grandma asked about me for months. Looking back, that part bothers me the most. We didn't FaceTime. He said his phone camera was cracked. Old excuse. Familiar. I let it slide. We only called at night. The connection always sounded thick, like he was covering the mic with a pillow or calling from inside a closet. Sometimes I'd hear shuffling or breathing beside him, and when I asked, he'd say, "Just my dog. He sleeps weird." Like, okay, sure, they had a dog when I visited, but it was a she, and she clung on to his younger brother like all the time. She never went into Evan's room, let alone slept in his bed. So at this point, I'm a little weirded out. But every time something felt off, he'd say something perfect, something nostalgic enough to disarm me, and I let myself believe him. Finally, we decide I'll visit again. He sounds thrilled, too thrilled, and begs me not to tell anyone I'm coming. He says he wants it to be a special surprise. Stupidly, I believe him. I book a flight. Today, this morning, I'm on the plane descending, excited and sick at the same time. I haven't traveled alone since I was 18. I take a photo of the clouds through the window, cliché airplane shot, and impulsively tag him on Instagram. I write, "Almost there." Within a minute, he sees it. Then he DMs me, "Why did you tag me? What the hell is wrong with you? Why are you flying here? Stop. Seriously, stop." I freeze. My stomach hits the floor. I click his profile. A public Instagram I haven't checked in years. Pin post his engagement photos. Dated 1 year ago. Recent story, a video of him and his fiancée decorating a Christmas tree last night. They look happy. He looks the same. So who have I been talking to? My hands are shaking so hard the typing is blurry. Someone or something has been using that number. and they knew everything about me. As I'm standing up to leave the plane, my phone vibrates. From the old number. Can't wait to see you. I'm right here by the exit, like last time. I look toward the front of the plane. Someone is standing silhouetted in the narrow hallway. Tall, still, facing the door, not moving even as passengers tell him to step aside. Just waiting. I'm in an airport bathroom now. The flight attendants asked if he was with me. I said no. They said he wouldn't answer them. Just stood there breathing through his nose like he was trying not to smile. I don't know what to do. If this posts, please tell me what to do. My connecting flight home isn't for 6 hours. And someone is still texting me. I miss you so much the first time. Your side of the bed is ready. Come back. Come home. I hear footsteps outside the stall. Not airport footsteps. Slow, fair, dragging. I don't think that dog ever really went near him if I remember correctly. But something was always in that room with us when we called. And it remembers me. Story 2. My infertile wife arranged for a stork to deliver a baby to our home. I wish that was a punchline to some terrible joke. But if you've lived in our house for the past 18 months, you know better than to question Ella's sincerity. Nothing is funny to her anymore. My wife used to be a joker. That was before we spent a year and a half unsuccessfully trying to conceive a child. Back then, she wore irony like a jumpsuit, a defensive article so well fastened to her body. She would have been unable to remove it in a hurry. But Ella lost that side of herself after months upon months of failed attempts at conception. I wanted the two of us to take fertility tests earlier this year, but it wasn't until 2 weeks ago that she agreed. The results were bad on both fronts. My swimmers were few in number, and Ella's estrogen levels were rather low. Treatment was mentioned, but my wife was too distraught to discuss that. So the doctor simply suggested we keep trying. Ella had already been far from her chirpy self for months, but she became twice as reserved over the following fortnight. Her spell was only broken on Saturday morning, around 3 o'clock, when the two of us were stirred from our sleep by a rapping on the bedroom window. Or maybe I was stirred by the ecstatic gasp Ella let out. "What's that noise?" I asked as the knocking persisted. I rubbed my eyes as my wife eagerly bounded out of bed and rushed toward the window. She tore open the drapes and invited streetlight into the room. "It's here," she whispered. Half awake, with my eyesight and brain both woolly, I saw something absurd perching on that wooden ledge. Two things, I should say. A baby swaddled in pristine white fabric, and whiter still, a stork. The bird sat with its blood-red legs tucked under its large white feathers, watching with black eyes of unnerving intellect as Ella opened the window and scooped the sleeping baby from its resting position on the ledge. "Thank you," my wife said to the animal. Meanwhile, I hadn't managed to say a thing. I was dumbfounded into silence, I suppose, because there was a fucking stork on our windowsill. A fucking stork that had, more nonsensically still, brought us a newborn babe in a cotton burrito wrap to our suburban home at 3:17 a.m. And as the bird brandished its impressive wingspan, elongating its slender legs as it did, my jaw dropped, perhaps in preparation for me to finally utter something to my wife. Ella shut the window and cradled the mystery child as its mystery delivery bird took flight, slipping into the dark. "What the hell is happening, Ella?" Seemed as appropriate a starting question as any. She replied without taking her eyes off the child in her arms. "I did something, Philip." I didn't like that response. "What did you do? Whose child is that?" "Ours." Then my wife, who had been despondent for 18 months, giggled contentedly. Teardrops ran the length of her face, wrapping around her chin and meeting her neck. I hadn't seen her joyful in a long while, and I'd never seen her that tearful. As I mentioned at the beginning of this post, I didn't question the legitimacy of the scenario for even a second. My wife wasn't pranking me. She wasn't joking around. She wasn't capable of that, after having been so broken for so long. Given it was all real, then I was more terrified than I'd ever been. "Ella, I don't understand. Where did that child," I began, not knowing what word to choose, "originate?" A silly word, perhaps, but I knew the newborn hadn't originated from us. Obviously, you might say, but nothing seems obvious. to me anymore. Not after what Ella and I experienced this weekend. Originate, she said. Well, from the stork, of course. I sighed. Ella, the stork brought us a child. You saw it with your own eyes. I don't know what I saw. Okay, she said absently, still not looking away from that thing in her arms. I hated thinking of the child that way, as a thing, but this whole ordeal felt unnatural, supernatural. Why? Call it a gut instinct. Even if that makes your eyes roll, but I'm not some Fruit Loop. Until that day, I'd never leant one way or the other when it came to superstitions or paranormal phenomena. That morning, however, I felt the tingle of some sense I hadn't previously known I even possessed. This was very bad, and not that my wife has bought a child from the black market bad. I got out from under the duvet and trotted delicately over to my wife, opting to take the gentler approach. I placed my hands over hers and rocked the baby with her. She looked up at me, finally, and smiled. I'd earned her attention. Ella, I need you to tell me exactly what you meant when you said you did something. She leant forwards and planted a kiss on my cheek. Isn't it obvious? I found a way for us to have a child. Philip, the stork brought us a gift from the heavens. Ridiculous. Sure, I'd heard the myths of storks carrying bundled babies in their beaks. Myths. But now I wonder whether myths have some root in truth. Maybe those old stories about the storks and the babies came from something real. Sweetheart, I said, that stork and this baby did not come from the heavens. Please just be straight with me. Why and how are they really here? What did you do? Ella's smile dropped a little, and she looked hurt. Screw you, Philip. Screw me? I scoffed. I wake up at 3 in the morning to find a baby on our windowsill. And I'm the arsehole in this situation? For crying out loud, Ella, just tell me what. The receptionist. Ella screamed in my face before taking a breath and continuing quietly. When we were leaving the clinic last week, and you were still talking to Dr. Harper, the receptionist consoled me. She told me a number to call. What do you mean? I asked, what number? Ella ignored me. I called it. Then I waited 11 days, like the man said. Waited for our ripe child. Ripe? I didn't like the way that clunky and oddly chosen word had been wedged into her last sentence. The man? I asked, Ella, you're being so cryptic. Please, help me out here. I waited 11 days, and that brings us to this morning. A white-winged angel delivered this gorgeous boy to us. A boy of our own. Just what we've been killing ourselves to create for nearly 2 years. We've earned this, Philip. We've worked hard enough for it, haven't we? Haven't we? I don't know why I gave up at that moment. I think my brain broke completely. I think we need to sleep now. I whispered, walking over the window. Ella nodded and smiled again. Yeah, I suppose I should put little Adam down into the cot. When I really think about it, I'm quite sure I believe sleep would fix everything. That I'd wake up to find this had all been a dream, because how could it possibly be real? I would wake up to find nothing in the guest room's cot. That preemptive and rather distasteful, as far as I was concerned, hand-me-down from Ella's mother. I closed the drapes in one swift motion, but my heart shriveled and tightened in fear. Greater fear than had been induced by even the revelation of the stork or the baby on the windowsill. I processed what I had seen for that split second. A man standing on the other side of the street. He had been looking up at our window. When I opened the curtains again to get a second look, he was gone. Of course he was gone. But that was a blessing from my perspective, as it only helped me to dismiss the whole thing as sleep-deprived madness. Just a bizarre dream born of your heartbreak in this complicated time. You're grieving the child you and Ella are unable to conceive. That's all. You'll see when you wake up. And then you'll book a therapist because, let's be honest, this is the most lucid nightmare of your life. But that inner pep talk didn't change the truth. I woke to find Ella scurrying about the house with Adam nestling in the nook of her arm. And I followed her about like a ghost, blinking repeatedly. Try to blink the baby out of existence, perhaps. Everything I experienced that day went in one ear and out the other. Baby monitors and baby proofing and baby this and baby that. But I'm not some shithead of a husband. I was just reeling from the horror of it all. A baby had materialized out of thin air in the middle of the night. Oh no, I'm sorry. A stork brought it, which means a man was real too. Was the next frightening thought starred asterisk. My gut lurched, and I spent most of Saturday staring out of windows at our empty street. And the daylight vanished quickly on that short winter day. So I was left staring out into the black, fighting to discern shapes moving between the glow of the street lamps. My heart didn't loosen. I don't think it had loosened since Adam arrived. "Philip," said Ella at the end of the day, "I'm going to need you to help me out more tomorrow." I frowned at my wife, who was once so sharp-minded. "What the hell is wrong with you? I know you've not been yourself for a long time, but this isn't that. Now you're barely acting human. Never mind acting like Ella. A stork delivered a baby to our window. We know nothing about this child. We know nothing about that man in the street. And I know you feel that tightness in your chest. Just like I do, the warning that something unearthly is afoot. That we need to get out of here right now." That was the speech I should have given Ella. "Sorry," I replied instead. I know my behavior seemed strange, but I was in shock. Have you ever experienced an existential horror that forced you to question your very understanding of reality? It does something to you, your brain, your entire sense of being. In my case, I was left a husk. I went to bed that night hoping, once again, I would wake up to find none of it had been real. And when I woke at 2:03 a.m. in a sweat, I did, for perhaps as many as 3 or 4 seconds, believe just that. Oh, it was a terrible dream after all, and I'm awake now. But the crackle from the baby monitor grounded me. Adam was crying, and I felt like crying with him as I headed down the corridor. I entered the guest room to find the baby wriggling about in his cot, bawling and slobbering and snotting all over himself. "Hush, baby," I cooed. Picking up our child for the first time, he settled immediately. I had hoped that holding him might change things, might warm my heart, might make me decide it didn't matter where the baby had originated. It didn't matter how he had come into our possession. It didn't matter whether the stork had been responsible or had simply been a decorative part of an elaborate delivery orchestrated by that mysterious figure in the street. But holding the baby made everything worse. My fingers had never felt so frozen. Not figuratively, but quite literally frozen, for the baby was ice cold to the touch. Worse yet, Adam looked at me with a face like no other. Again, I'm not being a shithead. I have nephews and nieces in abundance. I've seen and held newborns before. I know they all look different, but this just wasn't right. I've never seen a baby's face quite like his. Never seen a human's face quite like his. Adam wasn't saved. That was all I thought as he smiled up at me in a manner too knowing, in a manner unthinkably sinister. His little fingers curled around one of mine, striking me with terror so pointed and piercing that I thought my heart might give out there and then. I'd been right all along. This baby was a thing. Just as I was about to put Adam back into the cot and flee the house, grabbing Ella in the process, I was glued to the spot by a sound, a creak from the wardrobe at the other side of the room. My hands at long last warmed up, becoming clammy as I faced the now ajar door of the closet to find darkness. My imagination had conjured up all sorts of horrors staring back at me through cracks. So I let out a sigh of relief and lay Adam back down. I even tried to settle my gut by telling myself the baby was perfectly ordinary, that it was only the situation which was unordinary. Of course, no matter what my wife had agreed with the stranger on the phone, I imagined there could be no legal or ethical explanation for how she acquired Adam. Still, he was just a baby, I told myself. He had to be. It happened as I was distracted by his cherub face. The door to the wardrobe swung open, and by the time I had clocked the shape moving toward me, it was already upon me. He was upon me. That man, face masked by the shade of that unlit room with drapes drawn closed. I screamed as he pinned me to the ground, elbow flattening my windpipe, and the world faded as he spoke to me in a tone full of grit. "You're not the father he needs. You see too much of him, don't you? You shouldn't. He isn't ripe yet." The black outline of my vision pushed inwards, stealing away the world. I thought of Ella and even baby Adam. My greatest fright was that once my life had been extinguished, they would be next. At the edge of blackness, there came tremendous noise, a screech, footsteps against the floor, a scuffle, then an agitated voice. I felt the force lift from my windpipe, and I could breathe properly again. "Philip," Ella cried as she turned on the light. My eyesight readjusted as Ella reached over the cot to scoop out Adam, and I sat upright to get a look at the body of my attacker. He lay unmoving in a pool of blood, knife handle jutting from one temple. I don't know how my wife overpowered him. I don't know anything after this weekend. Ella and I spent most of Sunday talking to police investigators, explaining that my wife had killed the intruder in self-defense. What I found strangest was that the detectives had no questions about the baby at the heart of this break-in and murder attempt. The baby who, I was sure, would not show up on any official records. I was doubly sure Ella and I wouldn't be listed as his parents. They should have had questions. That's what I keep thinking. That, and something one of the officers said with a wry smile before leaving our home. "Goodbye, Adam, you ripe little thing." Story 3, The Bends. Calm down. Slow your breathing. You need to slow down and think. My panic subsided. The sound of my heart pounding in my ears dissipated as my body focused. My ragged breathing became calm and measured. The gentle lull of the water's currents flowed past as the muffled silence of the sea closed in around me. My air tank read just under 10% left. Damn! I'd been sucking air like I was running a marathon. My left hand gripped the anchor line, leading back to the inflatable dinghy waiting on the surface. Down below, the prow of the ancient shipwreck stared up at me, partially obscured in the shadows of the bottom of the sea. 50 feet to the surface, 50 feet to escape. I checked my watch. 40 more seconds until the decompression break is over. 40 seconds until I can resume my slow ascent. I tried to ignore the shadow bobbing on the surface next to the dinghy. A humanoid shape resting at the surface of the ocean. Mark isn't moving anymore. He stopped a few minutes ago. I catch a sob in my throat, and my eyes sting in my goggles as tears threaten to break free. Stavros' directions repeated in my head. I can almost see him standing in front of Mark and I in the resort villa. Sounds of splashing and laughter drifted in from the pool as we were briefed on today's dive. Now listen up, the bends are no joke. Under no circumstances do you ascend at any rate faster than 30 feet per minute. On this dive, you especially need to be careful. But how long we'll be down there, we'll need to take decompression breaks. Our bodies need time to adjust and off-gas the extra nitrogen. I can feel Mark's hand around my waist tighten, his eyes alight with anticipation. My heart skips a beat. I'll never see those eyes again. This was supposed to be the start of our life together, the start of our great adventure, our honeymoon. Scuba diving in Greece with our own personal guide was a dream for us. Years of pinch pennies over time and the generosity of family helped us make this dream come true. After a backyard wedding, we packed our bags and hit the airport excited for the adventure awaiting us. 8 days and 4 dives later, we were one away from our advanced diving certification. This morning was our 5th and final dive, the grand finale, as Stavros dubbed it, an unexplored shipwreck 110 foot down. When Stavros told us his plan over dinner, we both agreed immediately. An unexplored shipwreck was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. That night, as the warmth from the wine and food lulled us to sleep, unknown treasures came to me in my dreams. We set off on a beautiful summer day. When we arrived at the location, our eyes scanned the water, looking for a sign. After a few minutes, Mark spotted a darker blue outline against the blue of the bottom of the ocean. The excitement was palpable as we geared up, checked and double-checked each other's equipment. One by one, we sat on the edge of the inflated dinghy and launched ourselves backwards into the water. We all let air out of our BCDs slowly as we started to descend our diving weights, controlling our slow fall into the sea below, 30 feet to the surface. I looked down at my gauge, 7% left in the tank. I continued upwards at an agonizing pace. As I swam, closer details of Mark came into view. His mouth and eyes left open trickled blood into the water, enveloping him in a pink haze. His wrist, tangled in the rope, jerks his body as another wave bobs the dinghy up and down. Could he feel as the compressed air tore holes in his lungs? And as bubbles of nitrogen were introduced into his bloodstream, did the panic mask the pain until it was too late? The wreck came into view as we sank closer. It wasn't a frigate or modern shipwreck, but much older. It was an ancient Greek warship, wrecked on the seafloor. Rows of holes pocked aside where dozens of oars would once stick out, propelling the ship. A forest of coral covered the hull in bright pinks, oranges, blues, and yellows. Small shapes dance in and around the reef. A school of small fish flitted by. Their scales were a pearlescent gradient of blues and pinks that sparkled in the low light. They danced around us before darting into the ship's rower's deck. A large green octopus with yellow rings observed us before sliding into a crack it had made its home. After taking in the rare beauty of the wreck, we began to explore. Whatever sunk the ship left a giant jagged hole near the stern. A snaggle-toothed maw of shattered mossy wooden planks laid open, and we eagerly swam toward it. Thoughts of future discoveries clouded our judgment. We didn't notice the slow current that helped us along, slowly guiding us toward the opening. We didn't notice that the water in the cabin was bitterly cold and stagnant. Outside was teeming with life and movement, but inside the small cabin we were completely alone. As we entered the wreck, we saw an onyx pedestal stood in the middle of the debris-filled room. Covered in broken planks and shattered ceramic, it stood 4 feet tall and 2 feet wide. We could barely see the sparkle of intricate gold carvings on its surface. Stavros, Mark and I got to work moving aside planks in a hurry to lay eyes on the discovery. A low groan from below roused me from memory and reverberated through the sea. The temperature dropped as the sunlight dimmed. I spared a glance down at the wreck and regretted it immediately. Clouds of inky black billowed out of the hull. A pure darkness raced along the sea floor, obscuring the wreck, the sand and the rocks surrounding it. The darkness was too deep, as if a trench opened up under me, going down miles and miles where nothing could live in the bitter cold and crushing pressures. As I stared, twinkling lights blinked into life from the abyss. I turned, kicking my legs faster, ascending towards a dinghy. Stavros wasn't enough for this thing. It was coming for me. After a laborious few minutes, we cleared the pedestal from the debris. It was a sight to behold. A black onyx pedestal that depicted pictures of a battle thousands of years in the past. The glistening carved lines inlaid with gold stood in contrast to the midnight rock of the pedestal. Carvings of warships charged down massive waves, ramming into their enemy. Above the scene, in the inky black night, a large golden eye surveyed the battlefield. Mark gestured to the top of the pedestal, and we saw a half-spherical depression stood empty. We began searching the ground, brushing aside shattered ornate ceramics and decayed wooden planks, searching for a lost artifact knocked loose from its pedestal millennia ago. I let out a cry and a burst of bubbles from my regulator as my hand brushed by something hard. Lying on the ocean floor was a sphere. The artifact was the size of a grapefruit. It shone in the beam of my flashlight, a brilliant gold. Mark and Stavros made their way to see my discovery as I reached down to pick up the artifact. The artifact was warm to the touch. A feeling of overwhelming comfort wrapped around my hands as the sphere shone like polished gold in my flashlight's beam. Mark put his hand on my shoulder and leaned in to take a closer look. The light of his flashlight glinted off the edges of swirling patterns engraved into the surface. As the light danced across it, the swirls almost seemed to be moving. The three of us stared at a fortune in my hands. The warmth spread up my arms and into my chest as the current gently nudged me in toward the pedestal. As if in a dream, I floated to the top and placed the warm golden sphere into its place on top of the pedestal. We all floated, transfixed as the sphere began to rotate slowly in the depression of the pedestal. The engraving swirled up and down like the waves of a great ocean as a low thrumming filled the room. Faster and faster the waves crashed on the sides of the ball until it was a blur of spinning gold. Mark grabbed me by the shoulder and began pulling me toward the exit. Stavros stood transfixed, and I just watched as the sphere stopped moving. A sickly crack of yellow light worked its way across the artifact. It hissed and screeched as the crack grew larger and larger, like golden eyelids of crack, open revealing a massive yellow eye with a jet black pupil that filled the room with a sickly light. It stared at us, moving from one to the other cornea, contracting and relaxing as it took in its surroundings. The eye shot up on a torrent of tarry black liquid that spewed from the top of the pedestal. It poured over the sides and spread along the floor. What once was the sea floor of the cabin became a vast nothingness stretching miles below the floor of the sea. My transfixion was replaced by fear as I launched myself toward the mouth of the cabin. The blackness covered the sandy floor, and when it reached the walls of the ship, began climbing. Mark led the way with Stavros behind, as we swam with all our might out of the wrecked ship. A low groan emanated from the nothingness. The sound coming from the depths of the cabin sounded like a whale's death cry. A muffled scream reached my ears as Stavros shouted. Something thin and dark had wound its way around his leg and began pulling him into the ship. His hand scrambled for purchase, but the smooth hull offered no salvation. He pulled his diving knife, burying it deep in the ship, anchoring himself as his legs were pulled inside the hull of the wreck. I doubled back, reaching for his hand, and our fingers touched before he was pulled again by the inky black tendrils snaking their way up his leg and around his hip. His knife held, but his shoulder dislocated with a muffled pop as his hips were dragged into the hole. I reached out again as another chorus of cracking bones and cries of pain came from Stavros as his body was stretched beyond its limit. His eyes wild with fear caught mine. His hand could no longer hold on under the tremendous pressure, and his scream echoed through the sea as he disappeared into the blackness of the wreck. I screamed as I turned around and swam as fast as I could up and away from the wreck. Now listen up, the bend's a no-joke dash. Stavros' words rang in my ears, and I looked forward in horror. Mark hadn't stopped to help. He was already 30 feet above me, kicking as fast as he could toward the surface. I yelled again in a rush of bubbles, but he couldn't hear. I could see the panic in his body. Nothing I could do would stop his suicidal ascent. All I could do was watch as Mark slowly killed himself every panic foot he swam toward safety. The pit in my stomach grew as I checked my instruments and began my slow ascent, 20 feet to the surface. The ocean has grown frigid cold as the clouds continue to cover the sun. The waves toss Mark's body and the boat back and forth. Below me the darkness has spread. It continued to reach up, getting ever closer toward me. I kicked my feet, furiously ascending as fast as possible, 10 feet to the surface. I could feel the gaze as the yellow I stared into my back. I saw its sickly light reflecting off my instruments. I felt a swish below me as something grazed my flipper. I have no time to look back. 5 feet to the surface. Something tangled itself around my left flipper and pulled down hard. I kicked back and the flipper was yanked free. Ice crystallized in my mask, and my joint screamed out in pain as my body reacted to my fast ascent. Mark's body and the dinghy were almost within reach. Then I was face to face with Mark. His eyes, gray and lifeless, stared deep into mine, the same eyes that teared up on our wedding day as I walked down the aisle. The eyes I was going to grow old with. I'm sorry. I climbed, hand over hand, using Mark's scuba equipment as a hand hose. The wind whipped sea spray into my face as my body tumbled into the inflatable dinghy. I was in the middle of a storm. The boat was rocked by waves as I stumbled to the outboard engine. Through sea spray and rocking waves, I pulled the starter cord. I thanked Stavros for taking care of his equipment as the engine sputtered to life. I pulled the throttle hard. The boat accelerated forward before it whipped around, anchored by the line tethered to the front of the ship. I was thrown to the floor of the dinghy and scrambled my way to the bow where the anchor line was tied. I reached for the diving knife at my hip and began hacking at the cord as something pulled from below. Black tendrils snaked their way up Mark's body, pulling him deeper. As he was dragged down, the front of the boat dipped below the waves, taking on water. His hand, wound around the anchor cord, pulled us below the waves. I took a breath as the icy water engulfed the dinghy as the front was submerged. Yellow golden light poured from the great eye as we came face to face. An abyss of starry night surrounded us as its tendrils pulled Mark in the dinghy. Stars and galaxies twinkled in the infinite ocean of space. The great ice studied me, an iris miles across, growing and shrinking as a brilliant yellow cornea contracted. It was a finite and the infinite, floating in deep black space. With another hack, the cord snapped. Mark disappeared under the waves as the dinghy rocketed towards the surface. The sputtering of the motor motivated my screaming joints as I threw myself at the tiller. I caught it in my hand and twisted hard on the throttle. The dinghy shot forward, speeding up the nearest swell and cresting it with ease. I sped back toward the island. The wind whipped my hair. Tears stung my cheeks as I let out a muffled sob. The clouds above grew more and more sparse. The sun began to peek through, and the waves settled. I left the storm behind as I skipped across the water. I came to in a hospital bed a week later. My mother held my hand as my eyes flit open. For the next few days, I underwent tests and took questions from police. I told as much as I could, and they let me go. I feel empty, drifting through the days. Through work, friends, and life, I am a shadow of my former self. I lay in bed tossing and turning anxious for sleep. When I finally drift off, the great eye calls to me from another place. It thanks me with warm, comforting dreams. I long for the peace it promises me. A future, holding hands with Mark as we drift from star to star, exploring a new galaxy all to our own. A future without pain or worry. In my dreams, I feel whole, deep below the waves in the embrace of its infinite gaze. Story 4, Something in the Air. Everything's falling apart around me. Friends, family, and strangers alike have all succumbed to whatever this is. My world is crumbling before me. And you know the worst part? I can't do a thing about it. Not that I'm sure I'd be able to anyways, though. It started just yesterday evening, though it seems like such a long time ago now. I get sick easily, which makes me wonder why I was able to go so long without affecting me. What did affect me was a nasty case of flu. Caught it 4 days before all of this happened, and it knocked me right out. 1 second, I was getting home from work and preparing to do some homework. The next, I was bedridden and trying to expel the sickness any way I could. That really is the worst part, not being able to do a thing about this. I can't help anyone. I can't help myself. I can't do anything. I had no clue what was going on until Mom got home from the store last night with all the essentials she'd get when one of us boys were sick. She looked shaken, like she'd seen a ghost. I couldn't see her. My bedroom door was closed, but I could hear her. It sounded like she was circling around the same spot over and over again, pacing from stress. Maybe, I wasn't sure. After a while, the pacing stopped and I could hear the footsteps approaching my room. She knocked, and I did my best to let her know she could come in. She entered my room with some ginger ale and other items you'd normally have when sick. As she dropped some of them off, I got curious and tried to find out what had happened. I almost regret finding out, and I'm sure Mom regretted telling me. But something like this can't stay a secret. I'm going to tell you what happened. Mom seemed a little frantic as she dropped my essentials off. So I decided to bite and try and ask her what had happened. Mom, what happened? You, okay? I rasped the words, my sore throat quickly having to adapt to me talking. It hurt. She said. Something at the store? What? I asked. I really don't think you need to know. She replied, it's messed up. I may not have needed to know, but I certainly wanted to. I figured I'd keep pestering her until I got an answer. I'd like to, I said, trying to shrug my shoulders. I was unable to, but she got the point from looking at me attempting it. Just curious. Are you really sure you want to know what happened? She asked. It's like I already told you, it was messed up. Why, yes. I rasped. Okay. She said, pulling out my desk chair and taking a seat while facing me. I did warn you, though. Apparently something had happened to someone just outside of the store. It was horrible. Mom said, Do you know Rob from the antique store? Seen him around. I said, Why? Well, something happened to him today, something bad. She replied, It was just before I went in. I was a little bit behind him. So he would have made it in before me. He would have made it if he didn't suddenly collapse near the entrance. I remained silent. Better that I didn't put any strain on my throat. There were others, but they just stood around and didn't do anything. I took it upon myself to go and help him. But, oh God, it was horrible. I didn't reply, just nodded my head. There was blood, coming out of his mouth. But there was this other stuff too. It was yellow, kind of chunky, like vomit, almost. At this point, she had to take a second and cover her mouth. Taking measures not to throw up, I assumed. Okay, she resumed. It was like vomit, but not so solid. It was similar in texture to gelatin. It was leaking out of Rob's mouth in addition to the blood. As I looked closer, I could see the same yellow gunk on different parts of his face. It looked darker and more concentrated around his eyes, ears and nose. Maybe where it had started, or maybe he inhaled something. My heart began to thump a little quicker. It couldn't be assumed that this was just a bad allergic reaction to something like pollen. It was possible for this kind of thing to happen. But what were the odds that he had suffered from an allergic reaction this badly? To puke up blood? It didn't make sense. Not a whole lot. It's not pollen season. Mom said, Well, there are some that persist this late into the year, but none like this. I tapped him on the shoulder, and he just shuddered. Didn't really move. Didn't really do anything. Just shook and went right back to how he was. That was only for a few seconds, though. I shook my head and raised my eyebrows. Well, I did as much as I could to do both. She put both hands on her head before resuming. He started shaking again, harder and harder. I would have mistaken it for a seizure if what happened next didn't happen. Abruptly, he stopped shaking and shot right up. 1 second. He was laying on the ground in a pool of his own blood and that disgusting yellow stuff. The next, Mom was suddenly and violently cut off by a nasty coughing fit. Sounded like it hurt. After a few seconds, she was able to clear her throat and stop coughing. Jeez, she said. Sorry, that was gross. I shook my head again, silently asking her to continue the story. Okay, she said. Right. Rob stood up in the position that he was in, which surprised me, considering his previous circumstances. It was a little strange. I finally got a more proper look at him. Well, his face, mostly. The yellow gunk wasn't just crusted on his face anymore. It was actively leaking from his ears, eyes, and nose. He started to move towards me. I said his name, but it was like he didn't know who I was. He started to run. So I dove out of the way and went crashing to the pavement. Instead of doing whatever he wanted to do to me, Rob. She broke a little and covered her mouth to stifle a sob. I assumed I was wrong. It was horrifying, Michael. That caught me. Normally, she'd use my nickname, Mikey. She'd only use my full name in serious situations. Rob just ran. He sprinted, full speed, just ran way past me and the store into the forest behind it. It was so horrible. And he left behind more of that stuff, that yellow gunk. It mostly just flew out his mouth, but some dripped from the other holes in his face. It's only been an hour? But nothing's been reported. Nothing has been reported regarding Rob. I'm sorry. I rasped. It's okay, she said. You didn't do anything. She was once again cut off by a violent coughing fit after she recovered. It looked like there was still more of the story to tell. When I went inside the store, the situation was better, but not by much. Some people were coughing, but it wasn't nearly as bad as what I saw with Rob. It was just the same thing throughout the whole store. Just people intermittently coughing. I never saw if they coughed anything up like how Rob did, but I wouldn't have been surprised if that was the case. I said weakly. I got the groceries and got out as quickly as I could. Things moved fast when I was in the store. By the time I got out, a lot more people were coughing. I did my best to hold my breath as I made my way to the car. I got in, and I was able to breathe. Didn't speed, but I made my way home relatively quick. Closed all the windows and doors and shut everything out. Tried to. You don't think you got it, did you? I muttered. Oh, God, I hope not, she said. It's just so horrible. I think we should stop talking about it. It's late. Is it? I asked. Yes, I need to go to bed for work tomorrow. I'll stop back here periodically to check on you. Stay in the house, okay? I nodded. Good, she said, getting up. I'm not sure what's happening, but we should try and stay yes. One last time, she was violently interrupted by another coughing fit. This one went on for longer and sounded more vicious. She finished coughing and quickly turned around. Good night, Michael, she said, grabbing the door handle with her right hand. I love you. Why, you too. I managed. She closed the door. Her rapid movements hadn't been from nothing. I was sure that she turned around as quickly as she did to hide something that terrified her. Something that terrified me. Something she didn't know I'd seen. She did indeed turn around quickly, but not quickly enough for me to see the yellow mucus like slime she coughed out. Mom got whatever it was. Mom is gone. I woke up earlier today to nothing. No sounds in the house. It felt cold, though. A door must have been opened, whether it was by Mom or someone else. I don't know. What I know is that she's gone, and a door is open somewhere in the house. The fact that I can feel the cold in my room only tells me that I've probably been breathing the outside air. I can't get up. Still too tired to move from my bed. I did wake up with a little more strength. Not much, though, just enough to do something like using my phone. That's how I'm getting this out. It's been completely silent since this morning, but I'm not so sure that it's going to stay that way. I'm hearing footsteps in the grass outside the part of the house where my room is located. No words, just grunts and small noises. They're outside my house. I'm writing this as a warning. Something's wrong with the air. I don't know what it is or why it's happening, but it's making people sick, making them lose control of their bodies. It's made me sick. Just a few minutes ago, I was plagued by a sudden and savage coughing fit. My throat hurt so badly I had to strain and close my eyes just to mitigate some pain. When I opened my eyes, I saw some of the yellow gunk on my blanket. I wish I could do something, anything to help, but I'm sick in more ways than one. I can't get out of bed. I have whatever this is. And you know the worst part of it all? I wouldn't even be able to do anything if I didn't have this. Still knocked out with the flu. What I can do, however, is send out a warning. This infection, whatever it may be, is turning people into God. I don't even know what to call them. Mindless, feral, almost zombie-like. It's something in the air. I know that much for sure. If you haven't already caught it, get inside and hunker down. Get as much food as you can, and make sure your home is well sealed. And most importantly, when you're outside, don't breathe it in. Story 5. I took shelter from the blizzard. I should have stayed outside. I only wanted warmth and shelter. What I found in their basement still haunts me. I wasn't sure I would survive. The storm hit harder than anything I'd seen before. I tried to get out my satellite phone, but my fingers couldn't press the buttons. Every step fell harder. Fingers and toes didn't hurt anymore. They just felt numb. Then, like a beacon, I saw an outline of a house. I knocked on the door, barely able to clench my fist. An old woman came out and quickly rushed me in. My whole world felt like a blur. When they took the gloves off, my fingers had started to turn white. You almost lost your fingers, the old woman said. The heat from the fireplace felt like stabs in my hands and feet, but I reluctantly warmed myself up. They said they hadn't seen a storm as bad as this one in years. I was lucky to find their house. Their house smelled of cooked meat, making my body shiver with excitement. The old couple was nice enough to let me eat with them. The steak tasted like beef mixed with pork. It had a soft texture with a delicious, sweet taste. "How do you like your steak, sweetheart?" the old woman asked. "The steak is delicious. What did you season it with?" I returned the question. "Only salt and pepper, nothing else." She replied. They both laughed and looked at each other. The man then stared me up and down and got back to his dinner. After the meal, I finally regained my senses. The place seemed stranger than I thought at first. Their house was a mess. Trash and old equipment were scattered all around. In the next room, there were splatters of yellow and dark red liquid on the walls. "You should stay the night, mister. The storm will rage on. If you don't want to almost die again," the old man said sternly. I didn't like this place, but it was better than the instant death that was awaiting outside. They let me sleep on the couch next to the fireplace. The old woman brought me a blanket and sat next to me. Her eyes were staring me down just like her husband did. "Are you okay lying on the couch here, sweetie?" she asked. "Yes. Thank you for all the hospitality," I replied. She then started rubbing my back and shoulder. This soon turned into squeezing and feeling my muscles around. I scooted away from her. "You must have walked a long way." "You poor thing," she said. I laughed nervously and thanked her. That night, I woke up to strange sounds coming from the basement. The more I listened, the more I realized it sounded like muffled screams. I looked out the window, and the storm was now worse than when I first stumbled in. I pulled a small knife from my backpack and lay on the couch, clutching it. The muffling grew louder. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to help anyone or anything trapped down there. The floorboards creaked under my steps. My heart was beating so hard I could hear it. I put my hand on the door handle and hesitated for a while. Every sense of my body was screaming to ignore the sounds, but I couldn't. I never ignored another human's cries for help, and this cabin was not going to make me act any differently. I slowly opened the door. The room was dark and cold. I walked down the steps, searching for a light switch. My hand ran over something. I pressed it. There were 4 mattresses, black and filthy with cockroaches crawling around them. Each mattress had a person lying on it, with one or both hands chained to the wall. They had rags on instead of clothing, unwashed with dry blood on them. Their eyes were wide with terror, and their mouths duct taped. There were 3 men and 1 woman. Each of them was missing at least 1 limb. Most of them had both of their legs cut off, but one man in the very back was missing both legs and an arm. He was the one screaming the least, looking like he was in a trance. As I walked down, the smell of the room turned slightly sour, almost coppery. The nausea was growing. I couldn't stand the sight of this horror. My body started to gag, and I threw up my dinner all over the wooden steps. I slowly stumbled back up the steps. The floorboards creaked above me. Then I felt a quick, sharp pinch in my neck. I turned around. Behind me, the old couple stood on the steps, flashing the same grin they had at the dinner table. I tried to walk towards a man, but my legs wouldn't move, my fist let go of the knife, and I slowly lost consciousness. I woke up on a mattress with cockroaches crawling over my body. I tried to shake myself around to get the bugs off. My mouth was duct taped, and all I could make out were the same muffling sounds as the others in prison. Before going down to the basement, I managed to send my location and concerns to one of my friends, an officer a few towns away. But I forgot to check if the message came through. I heard the old woman humming upstairs. The door opened. A flashlight shone down the steps. "How's our new friend settled in?" I heard her say in her sweet voice. I tried to get out of the chains, but they were tight around my wrists. Her steps were slowly approaching, and the flashlight blinded me. Then I heard the faint sound of engines. I prayed it wasn't just the storm playing tricks on me. A siren echoed in the distance. I heard footsteps running up the stairs. The basement fell into darkness again. They found me before the old couple came down with their tools. I gave my report at the hospital. The officers informed me that they only found the woman. The man is still out there. Story 6. Every time I blink, something dies. I think something is taking over me. Asterisk warning. Insects and gore. Go ahead otherwise asterisk. You always hear the craziest things that happen to someone. Rumors of someone being cursed by their dead ex. Gossip that a scumbag was six-timing, and yet his fiancé/girlfriend/friend with benefits still want to be with him. And then that crazy thing happens to you. Just in a split second. Like a blink. There was nothing wrong with the way the light sliced through the faded curtains and onto my face. Nothing wrong as my hand groggily slapped the alarm shut. Twisting out of warm blankets. Toes snugging into the plush carpet. Yawning as my feet carry me across warm floorboards to the window. Nothing wrong as I tied up the curtains. Hand stifling yawn, basking in daylight. I took a look at my monstera pot, and it started to shrivel. Lush green turned yellow in an instant, browning, and then a husk of the plant. Just a dried up stalk and crispy leaves clinging to the hollow shell. An itch began across my left wrist, and I absently clutched it even as I blinked, uncomprehending, at my plant. Dead, just one amidst the little garden that I had cultivated on my tiny windowsill. A patch of brown, among the green, blues, and whites. I almost felt sick, but swallowed it down as I looked at my wrist. Red and raw and still itchy. It was only until day 6 that I realized how it worked. Until then, I had woken up and quietly watched as my little garden winked out, leaving just an aloe vera and snake plant among the brown, shriveled husks. I thought it was a blight, a disease, some bug. Nothing. Just me staring at them made them shrivel and die. Day 6 begun with a buzzing. A bug. Pounding the window. Warmed up and ready to fight the morning in full resplendor, if it could get past the invisible barrier. Unamused, I sat up, glaring at its fat body as it gathered its strength to collide into window. And in that instant, just as it pulled back, it froze, thumping toward the floorboards. I tentatively approached, prodded it with a book. Dead. Not the playing dead kind. So I experimented. It's what a summer break is for, after all. To check why things kept dying around you in the morning, as if you were some kind of deadly weapon. It's tedious to explain every single thing I did, but the gist of what I found can be summed up into 5 rules. 1. The moment I woke up on a new day, at any time of the day, looked at a living creature and blinked, it would die. 2. 3. For something to die, I must specifically lock eyes with it, even a glance, and after I blink, it is dead. 4. 5. Every time I wake up, the number on my left wrist increases, indicating the number of things that die when I look at them and blink. 6. 7. Nothing happens when I look at myself in the mirror. 8. 9. Living creatures that have died to blink. Plants, animals, human. 10. You might be wondering about Rule 5. Here's what went down in this sorry state of things. I started gathering things. Plants first. I had to have a backup plan, in case things went south, and you'll read about it soon, especially as the numbers went up, and as I was blanking out, watching the ants start to crawl about the countless fly corpses in my bin. I had an idea. Call it animal abuse. Call it a massacre. I'd rather than lock eyes with a stranger passing by outside the street, and watch them freeze, topple, hit the ground, leaking onto the pavement something red. It plagued my nightmares. So instead, I cultivated a kind of ant farm, coldly watching as tens of them halted and collapsed. Every day, I could nearly numb myself to it. But the nightmares were a reminder that it wasn't enough. In my dreams, I could see once more the corpse of the blackbird that alighted on my windowsill one morning, and with its chirp, I was drawn the way its glossy black feathers lurched toward the floorboards, a crack of hollow bird bones, and those glaze-over eyes that once held curiosity. Only in my dream could I feel as if I was 100 different scruttering things, legs marching in unison, mouths open and hungry, clamping down on that warm flesh, slurping that warm blood, and then lazily going back in single file toward my prone figure. But the last thing I see is my face, eyes wide open and inviting. I woke up sweating buckets, went to an eye doctor, went to a psychologist. Nothing wrong. Stress perhaps? Drink more water, sleep 7 to 8 hours, eat healthy. To hell with that. I try to figure out what was in my eye. What was my eye? Because as the days go on and the numbers on my wrist steadily reach the hundreds, I feel as if my eye itches. In a blink, my world fractures into hundreds of iridescent lenses. The hues are shaded in yellow, and the sun is almost muted in a husk of its blazing glory. Instead, the reds are shimmering and alluring, like fresh strawberry off the stem, aged wine down the throat. My eyes are squirming, almost like the way bees surround their queen, wings buzzing and quivering, a mass of tension and energy concentrated until it's as if they're a single entity, and my vision returns to a single pair of eyes, staring back at myself in the mirror, scared out of my mind. Desperate, I blindfolded myself that day. I hadn't looked at anything but the mirror. I was sick of the stench of death that seemed to linger around me, that sweet and unnatural stink. I recorded it as day, CCLXVI. It was unremarkable at first. When I calmed down, I thought it was brilliant. Maybe when I went to sleep and woke up, I won't have to watch my flailing ant colony, hundreds reduced to scrawny tens, nor wince at my floundering garden, a graveyard of browns, with a fresh batch set to arrive tomorrow, nor let my eyes rove over the little bottle caps of nectar, bees, and fruit flies floating on the liquid gold, or the little sparrows that had unfortunately come by the other day and landed on an inconveniently placed ledge beside my windowsill, unreachable and rotting away in the humid heat of summer. I slept the entire day and dreamt strangely, thousands of chittering, mandibles clicking, clambering across silk, down the bed frame, heading to the nearest signs of life. Leaves were torn to shreds, shoveled down throats, stems stripped to their roots. Across the floorboards now, cracking open the ant farm enclosure like a can of cold beer. Resistance was futile. The queen crumbled, maws gulping pieces of her strewn across the dirt, and the rest of the pathetic colony. Not like our colony, something thought, unsatisfied, venturing into the night, feasting on the carrion of the sparrows, still greedy, latching onto the neighboring shrubs, chewing till the roots, then to the curious and suspicious cat, uncollared and scarred. A great battle was fought and won, and the trophy tonight was the fresh, sleek splurt of red as maws clamped down and chewed. Chewed. Lizards, cockroaches, centipedes, devoured, nearly satiated. Just one more. A rat scurried across the blue of a passerby. A pause, almost contemplative, at the puny rodent and the hulking figure of so much meat. The bones were gnawed thoroughly, glistening white in the moonlight as the thousands of legs now headed back, up the walls, past the windowsill, and now gazing into the black iris of a gaping eye. The blindfold was still on me even as I woke, stuttering and stammering. I tore it off. Plants vanished, but for their roots. Ants gone. An unclosed enclosure case its only witness. It wasn't a nightmare. Rather, a living nightmare. So I sit in my bathroom, fists clenched white. After the usual itch, my left wrist reads CCLXVI, almost proudly pink. It's been some time since morning. My abandoned blindfold lies on my bed. Ever since fleeing to the bathroom, I haven't left it once. My parents have banged at the door, and through the gap I can hear them discuss on getting the key. Maya fainted in the bathroom, or something was a consensus. My fears tick closer to becoming real every passing second. A living nightmare. I wasn't lying when I said that in my nightmares, I saw a man die. Perhaps 2 hours ago, I stumbled across the room, searching and desperate. My phone ringtone buzzed till my frantic hand smashed it silent as my eyes searched for anything non-living, anything living. A part of me whispered that I should have lied to my parents the former weekend and disappeared into some remote location away from civilization and the danger I was becoming, the danger was growing into. Robotically, I scanned the rows of empty pots. To that ledge now absent the sparrow carrion. 3 bees and a fruit fly that sat bloated near the honey water bottle caps. Froze and tumbled. That was when I made my first mistake. Coughing aloud. My throat was dry from the hours of sleep, and the rapid-fire manner that the insects collapsed into their final meal didn't help. A hacking spittle came out my mouth. I clenched the windowsill, but the rattling from my shaking body only dislodged the bottle caps of honey and dead bees. I heard a splatter, a muffled curse and swatting noises. Then silence. I made my second mistake then, inching to the corner where I thought the victim would not be looking and briefly peering down. I was wrong. We locked eyes. His accusatory glare stiffened. The brief glimmer shock flashed by, and then he hit the ground. I heard the quiet crack of rock on skull, the red that leaks, but I knew that wasn't a reason for his soul leaving this world. Already I know that if I live past night, I will see him again, coffin or not, his postpartum pallor framed in iridescent hues. That yellow shirt is a brilliant gold, and know that the excited chittering will end up in a frenzied chaos of flesh, gristle, and sweet, sweet meat. Even as I hear footsteps approach the bathroom, I know I need to make a choice. One hand grasps the edge of my sink, while the other quavers, gripping the silver sheen of scissors. I aim the sharp point at my eye, again and again, as my courage lapses and rises like the tides. I can almost hear the chittering, feel the mass of energy and tension within my eye. Almost at the brink of some sort of despair and desperation, I ask a question to myself. Will gorging my eyes out end this? The iridescence of 100 eyes flash in the mirror. My world breaks into one of yellow blooming across the cracks of tiles, and the red that bleeds from my clenched fist. Something asks back, meat? Story 7. Our father signed a contract that ruined our lives. My father loved a good paper trail. He always stressed the necessity of having proper documentation for every purchase, every agreement, every discussion that ended with something fundamentally different than when it had begun. He believed in the importance of paperwork and the uselessness of a good handshake. The only legally binding thing a hand can do is put ink to paper, he'd always say, and to believe the gesture of touching palm to palm holds any sort of weight is to open yourself up to the evils of human dishonesty. It is for this reason that, upon his recent death, my sister and I were left with the long, arduous task of sorting through the library of paperwork that the man left behind. When I call the collection a library, I do so without an ounce of hyperbole. His vast hoard of papers easily filled an entire large room's worth of drawers, files, and shelves. We knew we'd have a handle his last will and testament when he passed, and knowing our old man, we figured it would be a headache to get through. But at the time we thought this one document would be the worst of it. We had no idea what we were getting ourselves into upon diving into his extensive collection of records. We were both genuinely surprised by how many old documents the man had hung onto over the years, even long after their usefulness had dried up. Bank membership forms from the 1970s for banks long since defunct. Half-century-old grocery store receipts handwritten in blotchy, messy ink. Parking tickets paid lifetimes ago for cars he hadn't owned in decades. It was all there, filed away neatly in the darkness of his old office, waiting for the day that we'd have the displeasure of drawing it all back out into the light, knowing that most of it was worthless. We were tempted to simply shred it all and throw it away, but the persistent nagging that something of importance might be hidden in that massive trove of paperwork was strong enough that it convinced us to sort through it all manually. In a way, this was actually a much more enriching experience than I would have thought. We got to see how our father's signature evolved throughout his life, and going through those decades worth of documents gave us the sense that we were reliving that life from start to finish. But at the same time, it was an agonizing chore that I dreaded doing each day, because yes, it took us days to sort through all of that old paperwork, most of which was a complete waste of time. I suppose I couldn't really be upset about having to complete this final task for our old man. He provided us with a good life growing up, and the minor burden of sorting out his paper affairs after his death was a small price to pay compared to the work he had put in to ensure that we never wanted for anything, and had always lived in the lap of comfort and luxury. I also can't blame him for his overly cautious desire to keep a paper trail of his entire life. He came of age in an industrial town during a time when industry was on its way out. Jobs spawned through handshakes and goodwill suddenly vanished, and the mines dried up and the mill's furnaces went forever cold. Nobody got any form of a severance package back then. One day you had a job, the next you didn't. One day you were able to put food on the table, the next you weren't. It was a harsh, unforgiving time in our region's history, one that we haven't yet fully recovered from even more than half a century later, and it set the stage for what my father's life would eventually become. Times were tough for our father and mother after he'd lost his job at the old mill. They managed to keep afloat for a while thanks to our mom's waitressing, as well as the various odd jobs that our dad worked. But it soon became clear to everyone in town back then that their livelihoods would depend on an industry that had gone to an early grave. And without that industry, their economy wasn't going to last. Our parents needed a backup plan if they were going to have any hope of getting by. Thankfully, our old man had one. Our dad loved to paint from a very young age. In fact, the second largest collection that he left behind, after his collection paperwork, was his vast accumulation of personal paintings that he kept in his private gallery. For his own purposes, he used to say, before the decline, painting had only ever been a hobby for him, a way to decompress and pass the time between grueling shifts at the mill. He never thought he could have made a living off his work until the desperate times came, and he found himself backed into a corner with no other means of making ends meet. And so, with his prospects running as dry as the mines and his optimism going as cold as the mills, he turned to that old passion in hopes that it would offer him a means of escaping from the ever-deepening hole that he found himself trapped in. Setting to work like a man possessed, he drew inspiration for his paintings from the urban decay and Gothic, almost sinister landscapes of the region in which he had grown up. His work brought him little success in the backwater town that he called home, where people could barely put food on the table, let alone afford to blow their hard-earned wages on frivolous pieces of art depicting scenes that they could look at for free with a simple glance out their windows. Knowing that he had no hope of making a living from his art in his current environment, and with the area's decline only growing worse by the day, my mom and dad decided to take on the ultimate gamble. They packed up their things worth keeping, sold the rest, and departed from the only place that either of them had ever called home. Their time spent away was, until the unfolding of recent events, largely a mystery to me. I knew they spent some time on the West Coast where my father continued to work on a stalled art career, but any details of his successes and failures that were never shared with my sister or me by our parents. All either of us knew is that by the time they returned home more than a decade later, their fortune had been secured. I wish I had known the circumstances that had led to that fortune sooner. I wish I had asked them questions while they were both still alive to answer. While I doubt they would have told me the whole truth, I might have been able to glean something about what had happened while they were away. The work of going through my dad's old records started as a tedious slog, and only got worse as the task went on. We brought a shredder into his office and began meticulously going through each document, ensuring that it was irrelevant before condemning it to its fate, leafing through those old files and deciphering the messy, aging words scrawled therein would have been annoying, bothersome work for people half our age, and with us now into our 50s, with our worsening eyes and less nimble hands. The task was an even greater test of patience. We did our best to stay positive during this time, to talk about our memories of Dad and, to a much lesser extent, of Mom, and keep the atmosphere as light and easy as we could. But this became more difficult as time went on, and we became disheartened by just how little progress we made against the seemingly insurmountable horde of records that we needed to sort through. The first noteworthy record, and thus the first one worth keeping, was found by my sister toward the end of the second day. I had just gotten back from taking a box of 3 decades worth of fast food receipts to the garage trash. I hadn't bothered to shred them, when I heard her speak from across the room. "Oh, wow." I placed the now empty box on a nearby shelf and turned to look at her. "What's up? Find something interesting?" "I'd say so," my sister said. "Come take a look." I approached her. As I drew near, I saw that she was at the beginning of a fresh box of records, possibly even on the very first item inside. When I came up alongside her, she looked at me with an excited smile that she hadn't even considered wearing since the start of our task the previous day. She handed me the slip of paper in her hand without speaking, and I looked down at what was written upon it. It was a bill of sale for one of my father's paintings, one titled Gothic Decay. The bill was dated May of 1958, about 3 months after he and my mother had moved out west. His first sale, my sister said. I should have known he'd have kept the receipt for it. I read the bill over again and frowned slightly. Not the most lucrative sale in the world, was it? "Well, no," she said. But it was a start. She looked back into the box that she had pulled the bill from. It looks like these are all sale receipts for his paintings from back then. Maybe even every single one that he sold. Knowing Dad, it probably is every single one of them, I said. My sister pulled the next one from the list. It was dated September of 1958, roughly 4 months later, and indicated that the painting had sold for a similarly pitiful price. The third sold in December. Again, for what I'm sure was barely even enough to cover the cost of his art supplies. Not a lot of money coming in that first year, huh? I said. This pattern continued for 2 more instances before ending in April of the next year. In almost a year's time, our dad had only managed to sell 5 paintings, and each for far lower than he probably would have liked. I might have felt bad for him, had I not known of the wealth he would eventually amass. By flipping through the receipts, we learned that he didn't sell another painting for most of that year, until November of 1959. I imagine during that long gap, he'd been forced to jump back into doing odd jobs in order to make ends meet. That likely led to a perpetual cycle of grueling work, during which he probably had little time to paint, and even less time to market his work. It's a miracle his aspirations didn't die there. If I didn't know any better, I would have assumed they had. My sister looked at the receipt from November of '59 and whistled sharply. Hot damn, look at this one. I did as she instructed, then joined in her surprise whistle. Shit, that's quite a jump. I guess this is when he finally made it, huh? To say he had made it with this sale was an understatement. This piece, titled Rusttown Blues, sold for more than double what all of his previous paintings had sold for combined. And things didn't stop there. In fact, they only seemed to speed up. He sold 2 more paintings at November, each for a higher price than the last. In December, he sold 8 more. In 1960, our old man was selling upwards of 10 paintings a month, and the number only grew from there. Over the course of the next decade, he sold dozens and dozens of paintings each year, each for staggering amounts of money. I didn't know how he ever had enough time to complete so many paintings, and I wondered if his seemingly obsessive commitment to his work is what sowed the seeds for what my mom eventually did, exactly 10 years later. To the very day in November 1969, he sold his last painting of the bunch. It would be the last one he ever sold in his life. And that's all she wrote, my sister said. This must be when he and Mom came back home. I said, a shame he didn't paint any more after that. Well, a few years after they came home is when he and Mom had us, she said. Must have been tough to keep up his work while raising a family. Yeah, well, Mom didn't exactly make it any easier for him, did she? I said. My sister shook her head. No, that she didn't. I paused for a contemplative moment before speaking again. You ever feel like we took his dream from him? My sister shook her head. He had plenty of time to pursue that dream. He and Mom had us pretty late, especially for the time, and they knew that if they wanted to raise a family, they really needed to get on it. They made the choice to come back here and have us. We didn't force it on them. I shrugged, still itching with a sudden sense of guilt that I couldn't quite shake. Yeah, I guess you're right. Just like how nobody forced Mom to change her mind. Yeah, she said, that too. We let the conversation drop and returned to our work. The painting sales were the first items in the entire collection to be spared from the shredder. Deciding it was good karma to finish on that high note, we wrapped up our efforts for the day and both of us went home. I spent a long time that night thinking about those dozens and dozens of paintings that my father had sold back then, wishing that I could see even one of them. I had shrunk so far into my own head that my wife actually noticed my aloofness and asked if I was all right. I reassured her that I was, even if the answer didn't feel entirely honest. She eventually drifted off to bed, and I decided to decompress for another hour or so before following her there. I opened my laptop and looked up a few of the names of my dad's old paintings that I remembered from the receipts, to see if copies of them had ever been posted online. No dice for any of them. His works must have only really traveled in small, private circles, but had evidently kept them just as private for all of these years. I suppose the money earned from them was tangible enough. But I found myself wishing that I had more to remember my old man by than just a bunch of rotting old documents collecting dust in his house. My sister and I started back up again the next morning. We spent most of the day locked back into banality that we had grown accustomed to in the previous 2 days. My sister threw out a box of expired grocery store coupons. We once again didn't even bother shredding those. While I saw the destruction of a drawer full of long-expired vehicle registrations from several different states, she shredded dozens upon dozens of old bank statements. I found and rescued our parents' marriage license, which I considered destroying for a brief moment before deciding that it was just barely worth keeping around, if only in remembrance of a happier time when the 4 of us all still lived under the same roof. Besides, our father had never actually officially filed for a divorce. He'd never be able to find our mother in order to make such a thing official. So I figured keeping the marriage license around could almost trick us into believing that those good times never actually came to an end. Inconsequential acts of shredding and saving went on for some time until I discovered a file stuffed with years upon years of census data. Something I almost tossed without a second thought. Had I actually done so, instead of taking a few minutes to leaf through those papers, I may have never discovered the knowledge that I am now forever burdened with. Upon deciphering the messy handwriting, I managed to find my parents' names in the 1958 census listed at some West Coast address that I had understandably never heard of before. A quick online search told me that it was a small one-bedroom apartment that, based on its pictures, looked like it hadn't been renovated since, well, before our parents had lived there. The 1959 data showed similar information. It wasn't until I reached the 1960 sheet that I raised my eyebrows in surprise. The hell is this? My sister, who was in the middle of eating a peanut butter sandwich, turned to look at me. What is it? I flipped back and forth between the 3 sheets, thoroughly confused. This census data, it doesn't make sense. My sister returned her sandwich to its plastic bag, placed the combo onto a nearby box of records, and walked toward me. What do you mean? What could be so crazy about census data? Take a look, I said, handing her the 3 pages. These first 2 just show Mom and Dad as living in an apartment together. Nothing strange there. But look at the sheet for 1960. My sister did as instructed, then frowned as realization hit her. Who is this 3rd person listed here? I don't know, I said. It's kind of hard to read the handwriting on that thing, and parts that aren't even filled out. But it looks like she has our last name. Did a relative of Dad's come to stay with them for a while or something? I guess that's possible, she said. Then after a pause, their address is also different on this 3rd one. I looked up the address on the 1960 paper and found that the house there, built in the early 1950s, was a huge upgrade to the apartment that my parents had been living in before. This made sense. By early 1960, our dad had started seeing good returns on his painting sales, and they likely could have afforded at least a mortgage on the house by the time the census was collected. But this didn't explain who that 3rd person could have been. My sister took the census file and combed through more of the sheets. This woman, whoever she is, stayed with Mom and Dad for several years, even moving to another house with them. That's weird, I said. How had we not heard of her before? Maybe they had a falling out with her after this, and didn't like to talk about her. I guess that's possible, I said, once again not feeling confident in this explanation. She looks to have moved out when they moved back here, my sister said. She's on the 69 census, but not on the 70 sheet. She must have stayed out west. Do you think she's still alive? My sister asked. I don't know, I admitted. If she is, I wouldn't even know how to get in touch. Makes me wish we still had phone books, she said. I doubt we'd find a woman her age anywhere else. A quick online search proved my sister right. We were unable to find anything conclusive about the mysterious woman who shared our last name. It was as if she didn't even exist outside of that census data. And even then, the information we could glean about her from that paperwork was limited. Her age was left blank on every census form that she appeared on. So we couldn't even guess what her relation was to our dad. With the trail going cold, we dropped the conversation about our mystery relative and moved on with our task. My sister returned the container holding the census data to me, and I continued to comb through it. It contained data for every year of our dad's life from the age of 18 until this past year, when he passed away. I watched as they returned back home from out west, after which their number went from 2 back up to 3 the year after I was born. From there, we expanded to 4 when my sister came into the picture. We remained as 4 for several good years after this. Then, abruptly, the number reduced back to 3. Seeing that sudden reduction felt like a punch to the gut. It took the wind out of my sails and killed my desire to review the remaining years. Following a brief skim of the remaining data, I placed the container aside and, after a short period of consideration, decided not to shred them. I determined that, at the very least, the information present in that thick stack of paper was interesting enough to hold on to. Our day continued on as normal. We were making real progress, and by the end of the day, we could see that the end of our cleanup was in sight. We thought about staying late that night and getting ourselves that much closer to the finish line. But seeing as we both had families to return home to, we decided to call a night at a reasonable hour. I spent a long time thinking about the mystery woman that night. My wife, seeing that I was once again distracted, asked me what was wrong, and I told her about what we experienced that day. She reiterated the points that my sister and I had discussed about the woman, likely being a relative that our parents had had a falling out with, and suggested that I not worry about who she was too much. This proved difficult to do, but with some effort, I managed to set the woman aside long enough that I was able to get some sleep that night. We got started early on the 3rd day, eager to get through the rest of the paperwork with haste, so that we could potentially finish the task by that afternoon. Most of the morning passed in a blur of shredded documents, many of which I couldn't identify now if I tried. Scraps of ruined paper filled the several surrounding garbage bags and tarnished the floor in bunches of long, thin streamers. We worked quickly and quietly, with little time spent on conversation. I was certain that we both spent that entire time thinking of the strange woman who shared our last name, though we hadn't met this woman, nor had we ever even seen her face or learned of her exact connection to our family. There was something about her that made me feel as if I had known her for my entire life. It was a strange sensation that I just couldn't shake. It made me even more eager to learn more about her. Was she a woman that I had met in my youth and had forgotten about until that census data dredged up the memory of her from the murkiest trenches of my mind? At the time, I was certain I would never know. Anybody who could have told me the truth was already dead. What I didn't realize at the time was that I would be learning her true identity very, very soon. This knowledge would change everything I understood to be true about my family. And even as I write this, I wonder if I would have been better off never knowing it. It was still fairly early into our day when I discovered the file containing the copies of our birth certificates. We might have found it strange that our father had made those copies had we not known who we were dealing with. But it didn't surprise us at all to find them there amongst his collection. What was surprising, however, was that where we had expected to find only 4 birth certificates, we actually found 5. Leafing through the stack, I passed first my sister's, followed by my own, then our mom's, and finally our dad's. I figured this would be the end of the file, and seeing as these were all unofficial copies and were not necessary to keep, I thought I would soon be sacrificing them to the shredder god that had been so gluttonous these last few days. But what I saw there behind my dad's certificate halted my every movement, and made me completely forget about the destructive deity that I had just been so ready to honor. I don't remember speaking, but I must have, because my sister asked me what was wrong. Knocked free of my sudden surprise, I looked up at her with a confused look on my face, and, struggling to even find my words, I weakly held out the 5th birth certificate for her to take. My sister approached and took the paper from my lame grip, then grabbed onto it with both hands and looked it over. A frown that must have resembled my own from a few moments ago crept across her face. She briefly flipped it over and looked at the back, as if its rear would somehow reveal it to be some sort of post-mortem prank played on us by our old man. When she saw that it wasn't, she flipped it back over again and reviewed it another time. What the hell is this? I leaned over and once again examined the certificate. Much to my chagrin, its details remained the same as they had been from my initial viewing. Written there in unmistakable black ink was the now familiar name of the woman, of the girl, which shared our last name. It's the person from the census, I said, voicing what we both already knew. The one who lived with Mom and Dad. Yeah, my sister said, except her birth year is listed as 1959, the year before the 1960 census. That means instead of being one of Dad's cousins or aunts, she has to be his Be his daughter. I finished for her. Their daughter and our sister. This fresh revelation stifled us with a stunned silence that clung to us quite some time. My younger sister, so shocked by what she had read, needed to sit down in a nearby chair. I opted to lean against the sturdy desk behind me. What's going on here? My younger sibling finally asked. What's happening? I don't know, I told her. These 3 words were the only ones that I could muster. She shot me an almost accusatory look. You didn't know about this? Of course I didn't. I said, Mom and Dad never told me anything about them having another kid. My sister considered this for a few moments, then seemingly accepted it. What could have happened to her? And why would they keep that from us? I shrugged. Your guess is as good as mine. Did she suddenly die out west or something? My sister asked. Is that why they came back here? To distance themselves from the pain of that experience. I looked down at the file again. There isn't a death certificate here. Don't you think if our sister had died, that Dad would have included it in this file? It could be stored somewhere else, she said. Or maybe he just didn't want to remind himself of it. Maybe he just wanted to forget whatever happened to her. But then why would he keep her birth certificate in here? I realized that, unlike the others, this one was a genuine article instead of being a copy. And besides, knowing Dad, he would want that death certificate filed, regardless of how painful it was for him to do. Maybe she went missing, my younger sister suggested. Maybe she was abducted or something, and they never declared deceased, just like they did with Mom. But Mom didn't go missing, I said. She left. Still, same idea. Maybe since they never declared her deceased, he never had a death certificate to file. Maybe. I didn't remember seeing any old articles about a missing child when looking up our older sister's name, but it's possible I either missed them or didn't recognize them as pertaining to the same person that I was researching. You'd think they would have at least told us about her, though. I'm not going to pretend to know what went through their heads at any given time, especially not through hers. I didn't respond for several lengthy seconds. Yeah, I eventually said, yeah, I guess you're right. We didn't speak for a while after that. We didn't quite know what to say. The 2 of us returned to our work, but it was clear that neither one of us was particularly enthusiastic about the task ahead. And so after another half an hour or so of clearing out our father's documents, we decided to call it a day early and return the next day to hopefully finish up. I didn't tell my wife about what we had learned that day. I would eventually, but I needed time to process it for myself before I felt like I'd be able to vocalize our discovery to anybody else without being interrupted by a crippling panic attack or a deadly deluge of tears. I'm sure she realized that something was off about me again, but unlike the previous times, she didn't ask me about it. I think she could tell it was a demon better left undisturbed until the time came that I was ready to poke it with a big, sharp stick. I lay in bed for hours that night, emotionally exhausted from what I had learned that day, but paradoxically unable to sleep. I thought about my older sister, who she had been, where she was now, if she was anywhere at all, why she had been kept a secret from my extant sister and me for more than half a century. Such a train of thought proved to be a strong sleep repellent. But eventually slumber's inevitable persuasion managed to convince my mind to slip into the realm of darkness. When I slept, I dreamed of her. Even though I had never seen her face, I knew the person in front of me was my older sister. She started out as a baby, the age she was when she was in those census papers. But she began to age rapidly, passing through dozens of stages of her life in a matter of seconds. She eventually morphed into the adult woman that she may or may not have ever become. I asked her what had happened to her, why she had been lost to us for so long. She couldn't answer. All she could do was frown at me and then start to cry. Spirits were low the next morning. My younger sister and I felt crippled by the seemingly unconquerable task that was sorting through the relatively few remaining documents in our father's collection. But with a pair of heavy hearts and a lack of enthusiasm, we set to work on completing the job before us. I don't remember when or where my sister found the contract. I suppose these details don't matter. What matters is that its discovery changed everything, and that it unleashed something into our lives that we would never be able to put back into the metaphorical tube. God, how I wish we could. It was buried beneath a pile of other contracts of significantly lesser importance. My little sister might have even looked past it and thrown away had she not been careful, though I doubt she could have missed the bizarre Stygian signature planted beneath our fathers at the contract's end. She spent a while reading it over before she showed it to me. It wasn't very long, so she must have reviewed it at least a dozen times while I sorted through other things, oblivious to her prolonged silence that had been so normal that day. The document didn't read quite like any contract I'd ever seen before, and certainly not like any of the contracts that were in our father's collection. It was handwritten on a sheet of yellow, ancient-looking parchment, penned in a way that looked like it had been scrawled in haste, but at the same time with an elegant penmanship that looked practiced, as if its writer had ample experience drafting such documents. I refused to copy down the words of the contract verbatim, but will do my best to paraphrase. The contract stated that for a period of 10 years, our father's paintings would bring him fame, wealth, and success. He would create important and beloved works of art with both haste and ease, which would effortlessly sell as soon as they went up for auction. At the expiration of those 10 years, the wealth he'd earned would remain, but his fame and status would be forever lost to the greater world, remembered only by himself and by anybody who believed him when he told of the forgotten past. Also on that day, exactly 10 years from the signing of the contract, and on each subsequent 10th anniversary, the writer of the contract will return to collect something from our father the writer's choosing, which our father could not refuse. This would continue until the death of either party involved in the contract. The document was signed twice. First by our father in that same handwriting that we had seen countless times and grown intimately familiar with in the last few days. His signature was followed by a nightmarish scratching of lines and shapes that I cannot in good faith call a word, at least not one present in any known language. Just looking at this malicious shape made me profoundly uncomfortable and conjured within my mind countless pillars of evil imaginable only to the most tormented of souls, and many that are mercifully beyond any existence soul would ever know. Both signatures, if this is what you want to consider the second blasphemy of writing, were penned in a splotchy, reddish-brown solution that I could not identify, but which I doubted and still highly doubt was any sort of ink. Our father's name was written in neat print next to his signature, so that it was easily legible. The other signer's name, however, was not awarded the same privilege. Beneath both signatures, though, was written a date, one that fell in early November of 1959. My sister and I sat in incomprehensible silence for what felt like hours, passing the contract back and forth, when never one of us had mustered the courage to read it over again. The heavy, unspeakable weight of the document resting between us seemed to distort the very fabric of reality with its density. When we finally spoke of it, both of us acted as if we didn't understand what this contract could have meant, but I'm sure that we both knew right away what its implications were. Our father, still struggling to make a living even after he and our mother had moved out west, entered into an agreement with someone or something, that promise and success he so desperately dreamed of and craved. And so he acquired a decade of wealth, fame, and success in exchange for a lifetime tormented by whatever entity he had taken up this contract with. He would then go on to die in obscurity, the extent of his success remembered by nobody else except the thing that continued to collect from him decade after decade, taking more and more from the man that it was so determined to torment and eventually destroy. Such were the terms that our father had entered into, and such were the terms to which the contract had bound him, until the time came that death finally set him free. I'm sure it's not a mystery what this entity collected from him after that first decade had passed. Subsequent decades, though, are a little more unclear, but I have a strong idea of at least two of those collections, which occurred while I still lived in our family home. One of these I'm sure you can deduce. The other I choose to keep to myself. Thinking back with a freshly open mind to those early years of my life, I can recall a pair of times that I am now certain each occurred on a year ending in 9, that I was awoken by a suffocating sense of overwhelming, primal darkness that swept over our family home in the blackest, coldest hours of the night. At the time, I assumed these occurrences to be the product of my own personal nightmares, quickly forgotten and seemingly unrelated to the tragedies that immediately followed them the next day. One of these occurrences came when I was just a boy, another when I was on the cusp of becoming a man. The former came at a time in my life when I did not fully understand the tragedy of loss. The latter was how I became truly acquainted with it. More visitations and subsequent collections must have occurred after I had moved out on my own, but since I was not present for them, Their energies must not have reached me. I'm sure if I try, though, I can conjure more family tragedies that occurred in the final years of decades past. But at the time of writing this, I am not entirely interested in reliving old pains just so I can recontextualize them with my present knowledge. Nor do I wish to discuss such things with my living sister. Much like how I get the sense she'd rather not broach such subject with me. I write this only a handful of weeks after having found my father's contract. My sister and I didn't finish our project that day, and we still haven't been back to sort through the rest of our old man's records. I'm not sure when we will. If we ever do, we left that contract locked in the sturdy drawer of a metal filing cabinet in our father's empty home until the day comes that we ever feel the need to reassess it. In the meantime, I've spent these few weeks in a complicated state of mourning for those I've lost and those I've never truly known. My father seemed to fall into both categories quite nicely. I've also spent a lot of time wondering. I wonder about what lies ahead for my sister and me at the end of this decade, now that our father is no longer alive to fulfill his end of the contract. When I last read the terms of the document, it explicitly stated that the contract expired with my father, but I would not be surprised to find those terms mysteriously amended should I pull that cursed record from its metal coffin and review what was written upon it. I get the strong, nauseating sense that the words Mexican might appear somewhere in there now, indicating that our family is not yet free from the curse that my father, blinded by a desperation that I hesitate to call grief, forever shackled us to. At the time of writing this, my sister and I now have less than 4 years, a time so agonizingly long, while also so alarmingly brief, until we know if we are truly free from the contract that has been furtively looming over us for our entire lives. I doubt if either of us will allow a single day to pass where we don't think of the document that we left locked away in our dad's home, where it will fester and rot until the day comes for its terms to flex their power once more. I'm sure we will both think at length, as I already have, about what will come for us on that cold autumn day in November of 2029, about the dark, primordial presence that is no longer bound by its contract with our father, and which may very well now possess free rein to attack us directly with its deadly claws of overwhelming malice. But I suppose we'll just have to wait and see what comes. Story 8. The crawl space kept growing. I bought the Mackin place at auction for $63,000. Sight unseen, technically, though I'd driven past enough times over the years to know what I was getting into. 2-story farmhouse, built sometime in the 1920s, abandoned since old Earl died, without heirs in 2019. The county finally seized it for back taxes last spring. I was the only bidder. My name's Dennis. I've been flipping houses in rural Ohio for about 12 years now. Started after the recession, when you could pick up foreclosures for the price of a used truck. I'm not one of those TV renovation guys with crew and a timeline. I work alone, mostly, buy cheap, fix slow, sell modest. It's a living. The Mackin place sat on 4 acres about 7 miles outside of Crofton, down a gravel road that the county stopped maintaining sometime during the Obama administration. The nearest neighbor was a soybean farm a half-mile east, run by a family I never saw, just their equipment sometimes, crawling across the fields like slow insects. I moved my trailer onto the property in early September, set my tools in what used to be a detached garage, roof half collapsed, but 3 walls still good. The house itself wasn't as bad as I'd expected. Solid bones. The foundation was limestone block, which they don't do anymore, and the framing was old-growth oak that'd outlast anything they mill today. Roof needed replacing. Porch was rotted through. Plumbing was a disaster, corroded galvanized pipe that someone had patched with copper in maybe 6 different places, none of them to code. But it was the floors that concerned me most. The kitchen floor had a sag to it, not dramatic, maybe 1.5 inches of slope over 8 feet, but enough that you'd feel it when you walked. Water damage, I figured. Old houses like this. The kitchen's always where problems start. A slow leak under the sink. 20 years of moisture migrating into the subfloor. and eventually the joists start to give. I pulled up the linoleum on my third day. Underneath was the original pine planking, black with age and softened patches. I cut out a 2-foot section near the worst of the sag and shined my flashlight down into the crawl space. The property survey I'd gotten from the county assessor showed a partial crawl space beneath the kitchen and back hallway. 18 inches of clearance, accessible through a hatch in the hallway closet, standard for a house this age. They poured a perimeter foundation, laid joists across concrete piers, and left just enough room underneath to run plumbing and check for termites. But when I looked through that hole I'd cut, my flashlight beam didn't hit dirt at 18 inches. It didn't hit anything. I couldn't see the bottom. I'm not a superstitious person. I've been in old houses where the crawl spaces flood, and the standing water looks like a black mirror. I've seen root cellars that go down 8-10 feet and fill with shadows that play tricks. I figured the Mackin place had something similar. Maybe a partial basement that didn't show up on the survey, or an old cistern that got incorporated into the foundation. I went around to the hallway closet and found the crawl space hatch. It was a piece of plywood set into the floor, painted over so many times it was almost flush with the surrounding boards. I pried it up with a flat bar. The smell that came out wasn't rot. It wasn't mold or standing water or dead animals. It was cold air, dry and faintly mineral, like the inside of a limestone cave. And beneath that, something else, something thin and chemical that I couldn't place, like old pennies, like the residue inside a battery compartment. I got my good flashlight from the garage. 400 lumens, rechargeable, the kind that can light up a whole basement from the doorway. I laid flat on the hallway floor and pointed it down through the hatch. The crawl space looked normal for the first 6 feet or so. Dirt floor, concrete piers, old cobwebs strung between the joists like gray lace. I could see the corroded plumbing running toward the kitchen, and the newer copper patches glinting where my light caught them. But past that, maybe 8 feet in, the ground sloped downward, not gradually, sharply, like the dirt floor just dropped away into something deeper. I couldn't see where it ended. The rational part of my brain started constructing explanations. The house was built on a hill. Maybe the crawl space followed the natural grade and opened into a deeper hollow on the downslope side. Maybe there'd been an old root cellar or cold storage that got sealed off and forgotten. Old farmhouses are full of architectural afterthoughts. I decided I'd check it out properly the next morning in daylight with better equipment. That night, I slept in my trailer with the windows cracked. The temperature had dropped into the low 50s, and I could hear the wind moving through the soybeans in the distance, that dry, papery sound they make before harvest. I don't usually have trouble sleeping on job sites. The quiet doesn't bother me. I've spent enough nights alone in half-finished houses that the creaks and settles are just background noise. But I kept thinking about that slope, that darkness where my flashlight beam just dissolved. I got up around 2 a.m. to take a piss, stepped outside, did my business by the tree line, and happened to glance toward the house. There was a light in the kitchen window, faint, yellowish, not a flashlight beam, more like a glow, like someone had lit a candle in there and walked away. I stood there for a long time, watching. The light didn't move, didn't flicker, just sat there, steady and dim, for maybe 3 or 4 minutes. Then it went out. I didn't go back to sleep that night. Sat in my trailer with the door locked, telling myself it was a reflection, moonlight hitting something, a passing car on the distant county road. But I knew what car headlights look like through a window. I knew what moonlight does. That wasn't either. The next morning I went through the house room by room. Nothing was disturbed. My tools were where I'd left them. No sign of entry. No footprints in the dust except my own. I checked the kitchen window where I'd seen the light. Nothing there. No candle, no lantern, no reflective surface that might have caught a stray beam. Then I looked at the floor. The hole I'd cut in the pine planking was about 2 feet square. I'd left it open, covered loosely with a scrap of plywood, so I wouldn't step in it by accident. The plywood had been moved. Not much. Maybe 6 inches to the left. Just enough that the hole was partially exposed. I stared at it for a while. Tried to remember if I'd nudged it somehow. Kicked it on my way out the day before. I couldn't have. I'd been careful. I'm always careful about open holes in floors. One wrong step, and you're looking at a broken ankle, a lawsuit, 3 months of recovery. I moved the plywood back into place. Weighted it down with a cinder block from the garage. Then I got my flashlight, my tape measure, and my phone, and I went back to the hallway closet to do a proper inspection of crawl space. The hatch was where I'd left it, pried up and leaning against the closet wall. I got down on my stomach and lowered myself through, feet first. The clearance was tight, maybe 16 inches between the dirt floor and the underside of the joists. I had army crawl, dragging my flashlight ahead of me. The air was cold, much colder than it should have been for September, and that mineral smell was stronger down here. My breath plumed faintly in the flashlight beam. I made my way toward the kitchen, following the line of old galvanized pipe. The dirt beneath me was hard-packed, almost like clay and dry. No moisture problems down here. No sign of the water damage I'd expected. After about 8 feet, the ground started to slope. I stopped, shined my light ahead. The slope was steeper than it looked from above, maybe 30 degrees, descending into darkness. The dirt floor gave way to bare rock, limestone, gray and smooth, like the walls of the old quarries outside Crofton, and carved into the rock. Descending with the slope were steps, rough-hewn, old, worn smooth in the centers from use. They went down further than my flashlight could reach. I backed out of that crawl space faster than I've ever moved in a confined space. Scraped my back on a joist, tore my shirt, didn't care. I got back up into the hallway and stood there breathing hard, my heart slamming against my ribs. Steps, stone steps going down, in a crawl space that the county survey said was 18 inches deep. I called the assessor's office that afternoon, asked about the Mackin property, whether there were any records of a basement or cellar that might not have shown up on the standard survey. The woman who answered put me on hold for 15 minutes, then came back and said no basement, no cellar. The 1987 survey was the most recent on file, and it showed a partial crawl space, 18 inches dirt floor. I asked if there had been any structures on the property before the current house. She said she'd have to check the historical records and get back to me. She never did. I should have walked away. I know that now. Should have eaten the 63 grand, listed the property as is, and let it become someone else's problem. But I've been doing this job too long. I've seen a lot of strange things in old houses, hidden rooms, sealed off stairways, whole sections of buildings that got walled up and forgotten. There's always an explanation. Old man Mackin or his father or his grandfather. Someone had dug those steps for a reason. Root cellar, storm shelter, Prohibition-era storage. Something. I told myself I'd document it, figure out what was down there, and factor it into the renovation. Maybe it'd even be a selling point. Historic property with original stone cellar. People pay extra for that kind of thing. The next morning I gathered my supplies, a better flashlight, a 100-foot tape measure, my phone for photos, a ball of twine to mark my path. I put on my knee pads and my work gloves. I even brought a respirator, in case there was mold or bad air down in whatever space those steps led to. I lowered myself through the hatch a little after 9 a.m. The crawl space was cold again, colder than yesterday, if anything. My breath came out in thick clouds. I made my way toward the slope, toward those stone steps, and this time I didn't stop at the top. I started down. The steps were regular, some shallow, some deep, but solid under my weight. The limestone walls on either side were close, maybe 3 feet apart, rough cut, but clearly worked by tools. Not natural, not a cave. Someone had carved this. I counted the steps as I went. 20, 30, 40. At 50 steps, I stopped and looked back. The rectangle of my entry point, the dim light filtering down from the hallway above, was barely visible. A faint gray smear in the darkness above me. I checked my phone. No signal, of course, but the timestamp said 9:14 a.m. I kept going. At 70 steps, the passage leveled out into a small landing. The walls widened here, opening into a chamber maybe 10 feet across. My flashlight beam swept across the space, and I saw tools, My tools, my DeWalt drill, yellow and black, sitting on a natural stone shelf, my speed square, my chalk line, the flat bar I'd used to pry up the crawlspace hatch. I hadn't brought any of them down here. I hadn't even noticed they were missing from the garage. I stood there for a long time, trying to process what I was seeing. The tools were arranged neatly, precisely, laid out in a row like a display, like someone was showing them to me. The rational part of my brain said, "You're mistaken. You brought them down here yesterday and forgot. You were stressed. You weren't thinking clearly." But I knew I hadn't. I knew. I picked up the flat bar. It was cold. So cold it hurt to hold even through my work gloves. I shined my light around the rest of the chamber, looking for another exit, another passage. There was one, a narrow opening in the far wall. Descending again, more steps. I didn't follow them. Not then. I grabbed my tools, all of them, and I went back up, counted the steps on the way. 70. Exactly 70. When I emerged in the crawl space, the hallway was dark. I checked my phone. 6:47 p.m. I'd been down there for 9 hours. It had felt like 20 minutes. That night, I loaded my tools into my truck. All of them. I wasn't leaving anything in the garage anymore. I sat in my trailer with the doors locked, trying to make sense of what had happened. Time dilation, disorientation in confined spaces. It happens. I've read about cavers who lose track of time underground, whose internal clocks go haywire without sunlight to anchor them. But 9 hours. 9 hours. And I remembered maybe 20 minutes of it. What had I been doing for the rest? I didn't sleep. Couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those stone steps descending into the dark. Saw my tools laid out on that shelf like offerings. Around 3 a.m., I heard something. A scraping sound. Faint. Coming from the direction of the house. I looked out the trailer window. The kitchen light was on again. That same yellowish glow. But this time it was moving, drifting slowly from window to window, like someone was walking to the house carrying a lantern. And then I heard the second sound, a rhythmic tapping, metal on stone. The sound my flat bar makes when I test a foundation for hollow spots. I didn't go into the house that night. I sat in my truck with the engine running, and the doors locked until dawn broke gray and cold over the soybean fields. When the sun was fully up, I walked to the house with a crowbar in one hand and my phone in the other, ready to call 911 at the first sign of... I didn't know what. I didn't know what I expected to find. The kitchen was empty. The light was off. My tools were still in my truck where I'd locked them. But the hole in the floor, the 2-foot square I'd cut to inspect the subfloor, had changed. It was bigger, 3 feet square now, at least. The edges were clean, freshly cut, sawdust still scattered on the remaining planking, and beside the hole, arranged in a neat row, were the pieces of wood that had been removed, cut into perfect 6-inch sections, stacked like cordwood. I know how this sounds. I know you're thinking I should have left right then, called the police, called someone, but what was I going to tell them? That my crawl space was too deep? That someone had been using my tools to expand a hole in the floor? They'd think I was drunk or crazy or both. And there was something else. Something I haven't mentioned yet, because I'm still not sure how to explain it. When I looked down into that hole, the bigger hole, the expanded hole, I didn't feel afraid. I felt invited. I went down again the next day. I told myself I was just going to measure, document, take photos for evidence. In case I needed to prove to someone that this was real. The steps were the same. The chamber at 70 steps was the same. My tools were gone from the stone shelf. I'd taken them with me. But in their place was something new. A chair, one of the kitchen chairs from upstairs. Wooden spindle back, painted white. I recognized the chip in the paint on the left armrest from when I bumped it with my toolbox the first week. It was sitting in the center of the chamber, facing the narrow passage that led further down, like someone had placed it there for me, like someone wanted me to sit, to rest, to stay a while. I didn't sit. I took photos, or tried to. My phone's camera showed only darkness, no matter how many times I tried. I went back up. This time I counted carefully, watched my phone's clock the whole way. I counted 70 steps. The climb took 4 minutes. But when I emerged, 6 hours had passed. The next 3 days are difficult to reconstruct. I know I didn't leave the property. I know I kept going down. I have fragments, images, impressions, but they don't connect into a coherent narrative. I remember the steps, more than 70 now. I remember counting past 100, past 200, and still descending. I remember the chambers, multiple chambers, opening off the main passage like rooms in a house. In one of them I found a bed, my cot from the trailer, sheets and all. In another, my cooler, stocked with food I don't remember buying. I remember the walls getting smoother as I went deeper. Less like rough-hewn stone, more like they've been worn by hands. Thousands of hands, over thousands of years, polishing the limestone to a dull gleam. And I remember the sounds. The tapping had stopped, but there was something else now, a kind of breathing, vast and slow, like the house itself was inhaling and exhaling around me. I'm writing this in my trailer. I think it's October now. The soybeans have been harvested. I can see the bare fields through my window. I stopped going down 4 days ago. Or 5. Time has become difficult. The crawl space is still there. The hole in the kitchen floor has grown again. It's nearly 6 feet across now, and I don't think I cut all of it. Some of it cut itself. The edges are too clean, too precise. I can hear the breathing all the time now, even up here, even with the trailer doors locked and the windows sealed. And last night, when I walked past the house to get to my truck, I looked in through the kitchen window. The hole was glowing. That same yellowish light, rising up from below. And in the light, I could see the top of the stairs. There was something on the top step, something that hadn't been there before. It was too dark to make out details, but it was the right size, the right shape to be a person. And I'm almost certain it was sitting in the chair, waiting. I'm going to leave today. That's the plan. Load up the truck, drive to Crofton, find a motel with decent Wi-Fi and cell reception, file the paperwork to abandon the property, let the county take it back. But I keep finding reasons to stay another hour, another day. There's always something I forgot to pack, always one more thing I need to check. And the breathing is louder now, almost like words, almost like it's calling my name. I measured the crawl space hatched this morning. It used to be 2 feet by 3 feet. Now it's 4 by 4. Big enough to walk through standing up. I don't think I'm going to leave. I think I'm going to go down one more time, just to see, just to understand what's been waiting down there, in the dark, growing the space to welcome me. The chair is still there. I checked, and now there's a second one beside it. If anyone reading this knows the Mackin property, the old farmhouse on Route 7 miles outside Crofton, don't buy it. Don't go inside. And whatever you do, don't open the hatch in the hallway closet. The crawl space keeps growing, and I don't think it stops. Story 9, Project Insomnia. Ever find yourself jobless, angry and fed up? If not, I envy your life. Unfortunately, that's the state I find myself in. Worked at a grocery store for about a decade. Customer decided to get rough with one of the other employees over some goddamn baby formula. One punch later, they're getting a couple $100 in gift certificates not to sue, and I'm out the door. I'd say funny how life works, but there's nothing funny about my situation. So here I sit, combing through Reddit for some horror, to take my mind off my impending financial doom, watching 80s slasher films when that gets old, and rereading my Stephen King collection, of course. It'd be a good life if I wasn't sneaking ever closer to starvation. One day, though, I get chat requests. I accept it and see a phone number. My first thought is that it's for some kind of ARG. So, wallowing in shame, worry, and boredom, I give it a call. Thank you for calling Project Insomnia. How may I direct your call? An upbeat female voice says. Got sent this number on Reddit. Wondering what everything is about. I reply, good for you. I'll connect your call. The voice replies. After a few minutes of hold music, that's exactly as you'd expect. Someone answers. Nathan, glad you decided to call. I've heard you're looking for employment and enjoy horror, am I correct? A professional-sounding man says, I'm a little weirded out. I'm not the type to use my name. Of course that isn't my name, but a stand-in, but I'm sure you all know that. Online much. And I certainly haven't been posting about my financial state, till this anyway. But people who run ARGs can get really into the weeds, so I don't think much of it. Right on both accounts. Why? I reply, we have an opportunity for you. 2 weeks of your time, using your skills 20K. The voice says simply, God, I could use that money in real life. But hey, this will keep my mind off of things while I wait for some answers on resumes. Sign me up, I answer. Nathan, I think you're misunderstanding. We're not running any kind of game. I'm offering you money for your time. The voice sounds mildly annoyed. Really? I'll bite, what's the catch? Is this some kind of MLM pyramid scheme? What's going on? I ask. Details can be given in person. I'll send you a location. We can meet and see if you feel the job is a good fit. I request you bring a suitcase in case you feel like taking us up on our offer. There are many other people who have been chosen, and time is a factor. The voice explains. I get some mild BS vibes from the statement, but it's not like I have a full schedule. A couple of days later, I find myself in a small diner a couple towns over, sitting with a man in a plain black suit. He doesn't seem nervous, but there's a vigilance in his eyes, like he's used to watching out for things. Glad to see you've made it. You wouldn't believe how hard it is to get people to believe we're paying 20 grand. The man in front of me says, I would. I'm waiting for the part where you tell me it's split up over a decade and requires a 5K deposit. Before that, could I know who I'm talking to? I ask. You can call me Adrian. And I assure you what I'm offering is real. By the end of this meeting, if you so choose, I'll have the money in your account. Is Adrian's reply. There's some silence. A waitress comes over. Anything I can get for you too? The middle-aged lady asks. Coffee for myself and a clubhouse sandwich with fries for my friend. Adrian replies. I'm not shocked that he knew what I'd order, more amused. Whoever these people are, they've dug into me. You're trying really hard to cultivate a mysterious aura. It's working though, so what's the job? I say, simple really. We want you to watch horror. Lots of it, for extended periods of time, and give your observations, Adrian says. Is this some kind of AI training shit? I'm not that desperate. I reply, no, Nathan, you will be watching real people. Nothing artificial about it. But I know the question you're really asking. Why are we offering you so much money for something you do every day while you hope to get a call back from the sanitation office or McDonald's? The answer is not going to be as exciting as you think. Your accommodations are going to be rather Spartan. Somewhere between a small apartment and a prison cell. We need secrecy and a high volume of participants. Hence the arrangement. Adrian explains. My food comes. I feel like I'm under a microscope as I eat. Adrian's eyes dissecting my every movement. So this is some kind of test run, I'm guessing? Halloween-themed attraction at an amusement park? You're paying for me to shut up about it more than anything. I question. Adrian gives a half shrug. Close enough for government work. So, what's the verdict? I've got 2 more people I have to see tonight. Adrian offers, sliding over a small stack of papers and a pen. I read through the contract, smirking a little. This is some McCaney Manor stuff here, Ade. Like this part about consenting to methods of encouragement that may lead to physical harm. You can't sign away your rights against assault. So clearly you guys aren't going to be knocking out anyone's teeth. Adrian smiles. No one in the organization has any intent to put hands on you. Astute observation, though. If you want my opinion, remove those parts. Just let people imagine what bad things could happen. But all the real bits seem in order. So what about my money? I ask. The grin Adrian gives me should have been my warning sign. But I was too busy getting a notification of $20,000 in my nearly empty bank account. Jesus Murphy, you weren't kidding, were you? It's like someone tried to turn a submarine brig into a bachelor pad. I say, looking around the small room. There's a bed with thin sheets, a large desk with a few dozen monitors, and that's about it. Enough room to maybe do some push-ups, but nothing more. One thing I noticed right off the bat is how the monitors are constructed. Thick, textured plastic leads the wall, locking each of them in place. They're hardwired into the electrical system, the plugs being reinforced and grounded behind the wall. There's a small vent in the ceiling, doing its damnedest to minimize the musty odor of the place. The toilet is what I'd expect. Stainless steel and industrial, but at least it's clean. The door gives me pause. Thick, steel, and with a slot in the middle. If the project takes off, maybe we will look into making the workspaces more comfortable. Adrian offers. Not like you could make it any less so. But hey, $20K makes it seem a lot bigger than it is, am I right? I reply, meals are served 3 times a day. We've not found any dietary restrictions in our research on you. But if you have any, feel free to let us know. You may keep your cellular device, but usage in most cases will be seen as contrary to the rules outlined in the contract. Once daily, you will be expected to give a report on what you're seeing on the monitors. Attention to detail is key, Adrian explains. Okay, so this is kind of like a night trap meets escape room situation, I say, sitting down in a small computer chair looking at the bank of various monitors. There's that attention to detail we're looking for. Watch the monitors, Nathan. Adrian says, closing the steel door. Want to know what I'm feeling? Joy. Yeah, everything is grimy and eerie as hell, but it's supposed to be. I'm alpha testing something or other, an immersive horror game maybe. I light up a cigarette and immediately notice 2 things. The first is that all of the monitors are showing 3 different places, about a half dozen screens apiece, give or take. The second is just how varied these screens are. Some are crystal clear, some are antiques, but all are behind a layer of almost imperceptible bulletproof glass. How do I know it's bulletproof glass? I don't, but it's clear I can't scratch it, and I can't leave a scorch mark on it. Most of the monitors are dull. A fast food place, a gas station, and inside of a house. After a while, though, someone comes home. A nice-looking lady, early 30s or so, smartly dressed and coming home late at night. I've been watching paint dry for hours. I'm instantly drawn to anything resembling action. What the hell am I doing here? I say, frustrated as I watch her through an impeccable screen. The house is dark. Her kitchen lights obscure the background. Shadows play like feral cats in her McMansion. I yawn, wonder when dinner is, or for that matter what time it is. Then I see it on one of the older monitors. Could just be glitches from the ancient tech. But I swear it's a pair of eyes. Subtle. Well done. It makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up. But as quickly as they appear, they're gone. The woman turns, looking to where the apparition once was. As she does, her fridge door closes. Whether of its own accord, or something else is unclear. Nice, I say, complimenting the scare. Theater or no, my heart's racing. Boring hours flow by like water in a dangerous lake. I'm brought something they assure me is dinner. Meatloaf, heavy on the loaf, nearly green beans and cornbread. I debate on keeping the whittle. At least the coffee is decent, and given to me in a 2-liter carafe. I look away when the woman starts changing. I'm starting to think this is live improv, and meeting someone after I've seen them naked seems gross. One lamp on a desk lights her as she places modest jewelry in expensive cases. There's a noise, a keening wail, and the woman turns around, seeing nothing. We're in the same boat. That is, until I look at a smaller black and white monitor. Standing in front of the woman is a rotten, lanky specter, torn asunder and enraged. Right in front of you, I scream, but she can't hear me. The objects in the room rattle. It's enough to scare the wits back into the woman. She bolts to her bedroom door. The thing, that mournful thing, grabs her by the arm. A sleeve of the woman's housecoat crumbles, the flesh beneath it beginning to wither. She tries to pull free, but the grip of the specter is immovable. She hammers down a hand, and somehow after 3 frantic blows, the spirit lets go, growling in rage. The woman gets distance between herself and the ghost, but the undead doesn't bother to move. Small furniture flies like it's been caught in a tornado. Windows rattle and fracture, sending broken glass in waves onto the carpet. The woman takes a wrong step, lacerating her foot. She holds onto a banister for support. The ghost laughs. The woman rises as if she's been picked up by one leg. She's screaming now, begging. Blood pours from her torn foot into her eyes. The spirit dangles her in midair. Her arms begin to twist and warp, snapping and breaking. I try to cover the speaker, but it's no use. I hear her pain. For a moment she's still, then defenseless, she falls. The feed on that set of monitors cuts out, and I'm jarred back to reality. Sweat beading. Nails digging into the armrest of the cheap chair. Well done, guys. I'm not usually one for ghost stories, but that was damn near worth the time. I say to whoever is keeping tabs on me, a few more hours of staring at the screens, and there's a loud klaxon, jarring in the small room. The monitor is shut off, and a pre-recorded voice says, "Now begins your 10-hour rest period." There's a handful of reasons I have trouble falling asleep, not the least of which is the amount of coffee I've had. A close second, though, are those noises. I've watched everything from Psycho Great to a Serbian film Horrible, and not once has audio stuck with me so much. I'm woken by that same eardrum punching tone. Before I can brush the sleep from my eyes, a breakfast is shoved through the slot in the door. It's about as well made as dinner was. More coffee and half a cigarette later, I hear a voice from an unseen speaker. "Hey, Nathan." The voice says, I can hear paper rustling. "That's me," I reply. "Hi, call me Percy. I'll be asking you a few questions about what you watched the previous day. If you have any for me, by all means let me know." The voice is level, friendly. I was expecting Adrian, to be honest. I say. Percy laughs. This is a little below his pay grade. I'm just a guy working a job, like yourself. Bit nicer digs, but I'm also not making $2K a day. I smile. "So, what do you want to know?" I ask. "Well, I'd like for you to give me your overall impression of what you've seen, with particular attention to things that stood out or may have seemed odd." Percy replies. "The format is neat. You'd think it'd get obnoxious, but those actors you hired and those effects make it worthwhile." I cut down a little on the dead air, though. The ghost was scary, especially the wounding around the face. Unique is probably the right word. The sound effects blew me away. One thing, though. Why did the ghost let go when that lady hit her? Didn't make any sense. Maybe she hit it with a Bible or something. But as is, I don't know, kind of killed the vibe. Seemed a little lazy or silly. I explain. "Good catch, Nate. I'll have the higher-ups have a look into that. Not a bad way to earn a few grand." Percy replies. "It'd be better if I wasn't hanging around with the ghosts of my own farts. That vent isn't doing a damn thing." I joke. The next 3 days go by in much of the same way. I scan the monitors till something spooky happens, and do my best to point all the plot holes and stupid things I find. Not that there's much to pick apart. The variety alone makes things worthwhile. I'm seeing ghosts, demons, a couple of slasher villain types, and a handful of different creatures. Despite the sponge baths and stale air, it's honestly a dream job. But I wouldn't be posting here if the dream didn't turn into a nightmare. Day 5 shows me what this place is really about. Breakfast comes, the same as always. A dish I dub graves, due to their color and my love of a good portmanteau. I answer some questions on the last thing I watched, some kind of monster fight club. Seemed way too action-oriented, more like fantasy than horror really. And get ready for another day. My selection consists of an empty barn, a deep forest, and... Adrian, I said in the interview, no AI bullshit. I'm out, open the door, and if you wanted 20K back, you can see me in court. I'm not going to be part of the downfall of art. I say, no reply. My issue is, I'm recognizing one of the places I'm watching on a set of monitors. Kumar's Comics. Now, I'm not much of a geek, but I've been known to buy a comic or two. And while I'm not in there every day, I know the owners well enough. Kumar and Jasprit Patel, a little over middle-aged and the kind of folks that truly love what they do. There is no way, other than some kind of generative special effects, I'm watching them. Guys, I'm serious. I say, I try to sound enraged, but I hear the anxiety in my voice. It's 20K, I whisper to myself, justifying tossing my artistic morals to the wind. The more I watch, the more people I know I see, the more I'm actually impressed. I hate saying anything good about AI. But if I didn't know better, I'd swear I was actually watching cameras hidden in the shop. The longer I watch, the more I think that this can't just be some kind of special effect. I try to shake the thought, but as the hours slowly tick by, it's all I can think about. But what can I do? How could I prove things one way or another? My hand starts to move toward my phone, a plan forming. The second I grab it, a loud speaker-distorted voice hits me like a slap in the face. "Nathan, do you know much about firing squads?" Adrian says, his voice calm. "What? No, why?" I stutter. "In any firing squad, one man is given a rifle loaded with a blank. None of them know who. The reason why is that certain actions carry a weight, one that's too heavy to carry for most. No matter how noble the intention, it leaves that sliver of doubt that maybe you didn't really do anything. It's how most members of a firing squad sleep at night. If you make that phone call, it's only going to make things harder for you. Cling to that doubt. Cling to it like a life raft." Adrian explains. "What are you saying?" I ask, panicked, "As little as possible for your sake. And I have to remind you, using your device to communicate is against the rules of your contract and will be dealt with." Adrian threatens. I feel like I'm on the edge of a cliff. On one hand, I know this is all just some game. Spooking me out is the point. But on the other, a lot of things aren't adding up. I dial the number. I hear the ring echo through the monitors. My heart drops. I feel sick to my stomach. My phone disconnects. When I look down, I don't even see the "for emergency calls only" prompt, just a string of strange, illegible characters. I hear Adrian sigh. Then the speaker cuts out. A few seconds later, the industrial toilet/sink combination starts spewing water. It goes on for minutes, soaking everything in the room and leaving about 3 inches of standing water. I'm shivering, scared, and I understand how truly fucked I am. Watch the monitors, Nathan. You may not understand, but you're helping to save life as we know it. Adrian demands. What else can I do? The day slowly trickles by. Every customer, every shadow makes my heart stop. Around 11 p.m., Kumar and Jaspreet begin to close down the shop. I think maybe they're safe. Is this just another of the feeds where nothing happens? No one likes being proven wrong, myself included. The door wasn't locked. A short, stocky man in a dragging raincoat and beat-up fedora walks in. "Sorry, buddy, store's closed. Open up bright and early tomorrow, though." Kumar says. The man ignores him. The stranger's faded plaid coat catches on a set of action figures, knocking them over. "Sir, show a little more care, please." Jaspreet says, nicer than necessary. The stranger laughs, mockingly. I catch an angle of his face. Pale, rotund, and full of small lesions. They look almost like burns, but as he grins, I see it. Each of his teeth are small clusters of wire. "Get out! Fucking run!" I scream at the screen, but of course they can't hear me. I know what this guy is, or at the very least what he's capable of. I can't just sit here. But what choice do I have? Yesterday, I had probably said he's the worst thing I've seen. He's not really scary, and his gimmick seems tacky. The thought makes me sick to my stomach. The callousness I've viewed people's trauma with. I vomit. The noise it makes in standing water makes me retch a second time. "Okay, Dick Tracy, time to get out of my store before I call the cops." "You have 10 seconds, Kumar says in a commanding tone. The stranger snickers again, then turns to Kumar and his wife. I don't speak Hindi, but the squat man does. What he says shocks Kumar enough he picks up the phone and dials 911. Of course, there's no dial tone. The lights flicker, then dim, then go out completely. Kumar and Jaspreet use their phones as a light, trying to find their way to the door. They reach it, but it doesn't budge. Kumar begins to rattle the door. There's an electric arcing sound, and above them is a twisted grin made of arching wire. I don't catch much of the violence. By the time the stranger sinks his teeth into Kumar, they both drop their phones. The feed cuts out. I feel lightheaded, like nothing is real, but it is, all of it. I just watch people I know get killed by a C-list urban legend. I don't sleep. By the time I hear Percy, I'm staring angrily at a wall. "Hey, I've got about 10 seconds to talk." You need to think about this like getting drafted into a world war. It sucks, it's gonna change you, but it's for the fate of the world. Percy says, his voice panicked. Why the hell are you doing this? Why are you killing people? I screamed. We're not. Every place you're watching is a result of months of research. And even then it doesn't always pan out. But the higher-ups, they don't fuck around. Do your time. Get out. Don't let anything get in the way of that. Percy pleads. From then on out, things don't feel interesting or exciting. Knowing what I know, the violence hits home. It fucks with my head. The worst of the stupid ones. The kind of things I'd share with my friends for the sole purpose of mocking the writer. Something about a creature or spirit that can be accurately described as cringeworthy. Taking someone's life is shocking and dismal. Then there's the cell itself. After the first day of standing water spots of mold and veins of mildew start to develop on the walls. A couple of days after that, I've got a cough that won't quit. It's my second concern beyond what I believe is a case of trench foot. Things are miserable, torture really. By day 10, it's all I can do to focus on the screens in front of me. I'm running a fever. One of my toes is turning a foul shade of green. That morning's breakfast comes with a familiar-looking stack of papers. I laugh, then cough. I see blood in the phlegm. It's a contract. Another 2 weeks of my life to have the water drained and some antibiotics. Of course, there's another $20,000 in it for me. But at this point, I'd burn the goddamn money just to get out of here. But truth be told, I don't know if I'm going to last another 4 days without medical attention and air without spores in it. I sign, of course I do. It's not like I have a choice. If it was a case of being shot, maybe I'd be brave enough to face the music instead. But the thought of dying a slow, infected death in this sodden cell terrifies me. There's no happy ending here. I'm still in this cell, day 13 in fact. The first day since the 5th, I've seen a familiar place. My cell. It sits, perched in a corner of the room, looking down at me from the ceiling. I can't see it when I look, but on an old, green-tinted monitor it lurks. I can't make out much of it besides what I think is a rusted old army helmet. Its long, brass teeth reflect the scant light in the cell. Water is flooding my prison as I finish typing this. A punishment for reaching out to all of you. This is my cry for help. My scream to the void to try and figure some way out of my situation. But this is also my warning. Something is happening in the world. Something big and chaotic, and worse than anything we've seen before. Rules are breaking, logic is failing. Things aren't what they seem. And someone, somewhere out there is keeping an eye on all the Reddit threads and YouTube comments. Looking for those people that know what they're looking for. Those of us who live and breathe urban legends and ghost stories. Watch your back, guys. I don't know what else to say. Story 10. Something has stolen my house, and I'm trapped in its world. I've been in here for so long. I know the child tried to use my laptop, but all it could do was hit the keys. I came downstairs one morning to a letter at the bottom of my stairs. A note from it. Under stair it said, I froze. I think it feels bad for me. I think I had no choice. It's definitely not calling the shots. The one with the boots is. Oddly enough, I can still connect to my house's Wi-Fi from this side. I just need to stay in or around the closet. I need some help on getting back, or maybe even how to communicate with a child. So I'll tell you what's happened up until now. I had just moved into the house. The staircase had been stripped back to bare wood, and a few of the steps in the middle had slight gaps at their base where you could just about see into the closet beneath. I didn't think anything of it first. The house was old, and the closet was far too dark to see into properly anyway. But lately, every time I walk up the stairs, there's a moment where my eyes line up with a gap, and it gives me the eeriest feeling. It's like when you glance through a door's peephole and expect to see something staring back or a shadow moving past. I told myself the feeling was normal, like the childish instinct to run up the stairs after turning the lights off. So the monsters don't catch you. Except in the real world, there are no monsters. At least, That's what I used to believe. I should have known something was wrong before I even moved in. When I first came to view the house, there wasn't a single person on the street. A few curtains twitched, but that was it. An entire road seemingly devoid of life. The day I moved in, my neighbor was in his front garden watering his flowers. I waved and said hello. He stared ahead as though I didn't exist, continuing to water the soil. Not even a flicker of acknowledgement. I thought he might just be antisocial, but it happened with everyone over the next few weeks. Kids cycling past. The family opposite unloading their groceries. Nobody reacted to me at all. Not even a glance. I would have thought it was some strange prank, but there's no way you convince children to commit to something like that. The final straw was the postman. I was putting up curtains and saw him walking down the street. I realized I hadn't received a single letter since moving in, not even junk mail. It is 2025, but I hadn't ever just received nothing. But as I watched him, I saw something stranger. He was cheerfully greeting the kids and chatting with neighbors in the most cliché manner possible. Got any bills in there? You can keep them. Don't worry, the dog doesn't bite much. It was like watching a pantomime of 1950 suburbia. The people didn't even seem real. But what really unnerved me was what he did. At each house, he'd walk up the path, stand in front of the letterbox for a second, then return to the pavement and keep walking, never posting a thing, as though he'd observed a postman from afar, but had no idea what posting letters actually meant. I didn't think it was worth making a complaint about not getting my mail. Apparently no one was. After that, I stopped trying to communicate with anyone. Life settled into a strange routine. Inside the house, however, things began to worsen. The eerie feeling when I passed a crack in the stairs grew stronger. Around the house, I constantly felt someone was following in my footsteps. When I left the kitchen after cooking, I swore I heard pots and pans clattering behind me. After I had a shower, I could hear the shower curtain sliding back and forth when I had left the room. It all made me feel like I was losing my mind. Then came the nightmares. Every time I fell asleep, I'd jolt awake the way you do when you fall in a dream, but my eyes would open to a different version of my bedroom. The layout was the same, but the room looked decades older, abandoned. I couldn't move, hear, smell, or feel. It was as though I were a camera placed on a pillow, facing the wall. The wallpaper was moldy, peeling in places to reveal damp plasterboard. Part of the bedside table was visible, along with an ashtray overflowing with cigarette butts. I don't smoke. These dreams lasted what felt like hours, the room slowly brightening as though dawn were breaking. I couldn't move at first, not even blink. Over time, though, each subsequent dream granted me a little more control. I could shift my eyes, then tilt my head slightly, enough to take in more of the room. A filthy carpet with dark patches, a tattered chair draped with clothes, a stained white t-shirt, grimy jeans, and mud-caked boots at its base. The last dream in that room was the worst. For the first time, I managed to rotate my head enough to see the window on the wall in front of the bed, except the window was boarded up, thick wooden planks nailed haphazardly across it. Through the gaps, I'm sure I could make out movement, a silhouette slowly moving side to side, as if peering in. It would have to be enormous to reach the upstairs window. I focused all my energy on moving my hand, trying to break the paralysis. My vision began to shake. The silhouette froze. Then a massive hand rose and pressed against the window. One finger raised and started tapping slowly, using its nail. I woke up instantly. The nightmares became more frequent, once every 2 weeks, then weekly, then every other night. In them, words appeared scratched into the wall in broken English. Live home. Food. On TV. Something was communicating. I thought I could break the cycle by switching bedrooms. I moved into the smaller spare room piled high with unpacked boxes. That night, I had no dreams. I thought I'd broken the cycle, as if they were anxiety dreams, and I just need to get out of my funk. Until the day I stood from my desk and heard, ever so faintly, the sound of typing behind me, long after I'd stopped typing myself. That night, the dream returned. But now I was seeing this room, a child's bedroom. The walls were covered in crude drawings, handprints, stick figures, houses on a street. It was my street. Every house was crossed out, except mine. I woke at sunrise, bolted downstairs in my underwear, and ran into the road. The drawing matched exactly. The houses, the street, everything, and still stood in the middle of the street. Nobody looked at me. When I returned inside, trembling, I glanced at the crack in the stairs, and an eye was staring through at me. I froze. It blinked, then darted away. I tore open the cupboard under the stairs. No one, but carved into the walls were strange symbols, unlike any pentagrams or graffiti I'd ever seen. More like crude hieroglyphs. That was it. I had to leave, even if I had nowhere to go. But the moment I stepped outside, every person on the street froze and stared at me. Cars stopped. My neighbor stood motionless, while spraying his feet, eyes fixed on me. I backed into the house, and they all resumed as normal. I couldn't leave. I couldn't sleep. Every day, every one of my actions echoed. Boots following my steps, pans clattering when I left the kitchen. One night, I didn't dream, but I was awoken to the sound of banging from my front door. I looked out the window of the bedroom, and I could see my neighbor continuously banging the front door. I ran downstairs to see what was going on, when a knock on the window beside me caused me to jump. Looking, it was the postman, a blank expression on his face, just banging on the window to the same rhythm of the banging on the door. One by one, each downstairs window started banging, all in exact rhythm with each other. It grew louder and louder as they banged harder and harder. It became deafening. Something splintered on the front door as it started to give way. I raced back upstairs, only to be stopped dead in my tracks. I was looking straight into the same eye again. It pushed a note through the crack that just had one word on it. Follow. It flicked sideways, indicating the cupboard. I threw myself into the cupboard and slammed it shut. Silence. When daylight crept through the crack, I opened the door and stepped into a different house entirely. My house, but rotted, ruined, abandoned, windows boarded from the inside with smashed up furniture, an old fridge barricading the front door, damp mold, decay everywhere. It was like the rooms from my dreams, but real. Movement flickered past the boarded windows. I ran upstairs and into my bedroom, the child's bedroom. The walls were fully covered in drawings, a sprawling map of the neighborhood, every building marked, notes scrawled in a childish hand. Food here. Don't go. Dead. He watches. Huge stick figures with scribbled eyes were drawn in certain areas, like the park down the road and the woods behind my house. Outside the window, through a gap in the boards, the neighborhood was in ruins. Houses collapsed, a crater in the road, trees burnt to husks. Gray desolation as far as I could see. Then I heard knocking. It came from the upstairs bathroom, which was now boarded up and barricaded. Something was pushing on the door and knocking. I backed down the stairs, and as I did, my eyes caught the crack. I ran back to the closet under the stairs and slammed the door closed. I stared out through the crack, and I could see my house, my actual house, untouched, clean, normal. I could hear faint sounds. Someone was in my house. There was a pile of paper that whoever was talking to me used to push the message through the crack. I began writing page after page. Help, I'm stuck. Who are you? Where am I? A muddy boot stamped down on my notes, and its filthy hand picks them up before stomping back upstairs. I found jugs of what might be rainwater, but no food. I keep pushing letters through the crack. I think the child manages to catch some of them. I'm going out to look for food and maybe a generator or something to keep my laptop charged. The map shows safe zones and routes I can take to avoid whatever the big stick man thing is. In the meantime, does anyone know what I could try? The Wi-Fi doesn't reach very far. I'll check back in as soon as I can.